Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Amanda Blackburn. Amanda Grace Buers was born on July 31, 1987, in Muskegon, Michigan. Her family later moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and then to Elkhart in 1995. Amanda graduated from Elkhart Christian Academy in 2006 and went on to earn an associate's degree from Pensacola Christian College in Pensacola, Florida in 2008. Amanda was raised in a deeply devout Christian family, where her father served as the lead pastor of First Baptist Church in Elkhart, Indiana. From a young age, she was deeply committed to her faith and had memorized many church sermons. Unlike her peers, who were eager to explore the world and experience adult life, Amanda's desire was to serve Jesus. Amanda was a kind and gentle soul, with a slender build, blonde hair, and a sincere smile. Her thoughts and heart were pure, and she consistently showed love and compassion towards others. As a teenager, Amanda made a vow of chastity, promising not to kiss a man until she was married, and she remained true to this commitment. Amanda's heart raced when she met the love of her life, Davey Blackburn. A native of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Davey was a devoted Christian who studied religion at Southern Wesleyan University. The two were introduced on a blind date at a Christian concert featuring the band Hawk Nelson, arranged by Amanda's sister and Davey's best friend. Despite attending different colleges, they spent every vacation together, cultivating a deep and innocent connection. Their relationship was free from physical attraction, focusing instead on shared values and faith. They took leisurely walks, discussed their thoughts and favorite Bible passages, and laughed together, finding joy in simple things. On one occasion, before returning to school, they engaged in a playful milkshake drinking contest, which Amanda lost. In a light-hearted moment, Davey teased her, calling her a milk girl. As he looked at her, he knew he had found the woman he wanted to marry. They maintained a long-distance relationship for a long time, relying heavily on messaging apps, phone calls, and extended conversations during their vacations together. They were deeply committed to building a strong and healthy partnership, and to that end, they sought the guidance of a psychologist to learn effective communication strategies. Amanda and Davey Blackburn got married on August 1, 2008. After the ceremony, Davey told friends that he felt a special connection with Amanda, which he believed was part of God's plan. For 4 years, the Blackburns lived in South Carolina, where Davey worked as an associate pastor at New Spring Church under Pastor Perry Noble. However, Davey felt restless and wanted to do more. He suggested to Amanda that they move to Indianapolis to start a new church focused on youth ministry. Amanda was hesitant to leave her family and friends behind, and she struggled with the decision. Eventually, she agreed to move after Davey convinced her that God had big plans for them. In 2012, the Blackburns relocated from South Carolina to Indianapolis to establish an independent church on the north side, targeting young people. They created weekly videos on their website, offering advice on relationships, conflict resolution, and intimate relationships according to the Bible. In 2014, the Blackburn family welcomed their first child, Weston. They lived a happy and comfortable life in a quiet neighborhood, with Davey serving as a popular pastor at a church frequented by many young people. The family was united and content. Tragedy struck on November 10, 2015, when Amanda, who was pregnant at the time, was rushed to the hospital after an ambulance was called to their home. Despite efforts to save her, she died the next day, along with their unborn baby girl, Evie Grace. The news of Amanda's passing sparked an outpouring of sympathy and prayers on social media, with friends, family, and strangers sharing their condolences. On November 11th, the day Amanda was officially declared deceased, Davey released a statement honoring her legacy, saying that she dedicated her life to loving and serving those around her. Amanda Blackburn dedicated her life to spreading the message of Jesus Christ and helping others find salvation. Through her death and legacy, even more people will come to know Christ. I'm certain she wants me to continue the work we started in Indianapolis." Dave Blackburn described the murder of his pregnant wife Amanda as a devastating blow to their Orthodox community and a shock to the entire state. The public demanded justice, calling for the perpetrator to be caught and punished. In his first interview, Dave recounted finding Amanda injured and unconscious on the living room floor, partially naked and surrounded by blood. Dave explained to investigators that he had left the house around 6 a.m. to work out at the fitness center, leaving the door unlocked, as he often did. If he had locked the door, it's possible the criminals might not have entered the house so easily, giving Amanda time to call for help. Amanda suffered 3 gunshot wounds, including one to the head, during the attack. Despite a swift investigation, no arrests were made in the days immediately following the crime. The police quickly cleared Amanda's husband, Davey Blackburn, of any involvement in the brutal incident. According to trial transcripts, Davey Blackburn's testimony was supported by that of Scott Floyd, the first emergency medical paramedic from the Indianapolis Fire Department to arrive at the scene. Floyd stated that when they arrived at the house in response to Davey's 911 call, Davey was standing at the end of the driveway with blood on his hands. Scott stated that Davey described his wife Amanda as lying on the floor, unresponsive. Davey claimed to have discovered her after returning home from the gym around 7:30 a.m. and finishing a phone call with his friend Kenneth Wagner. He entered his home at 8:10 a.m. and called emergency services at 8:22 a.m., thinking Amanda was sick or unconscious. However, it's unclear why it took him 12 minutes to make the call and why he didn't notice the brain matter nearby. An emergency room doctor testified that the blood on her head was coagulated, suggesting the gunshot wound occurred around 2 hours earlier. Davey claimed to have only called his father after calling 911. Authorities verified his alibi using surveillance footage from the gym, and he was not considered a suspect. The autopsy revealed Amanda suffered multiple gunshot wounds and signs of a struggle. The investigation included reviewing CCTV footage and interviewing neighbors, one of whom reported hearing gunshots 35 minutes after Davey left the house. The initial theory was robbery, given the missing bank cards and MacBook bag. Police discovered a series of burglaries in the area, including one at a nearby home where a woman reported her phone, laptop, and keys stolen. Another home on Sunnyfield Court was burgled, with several items missing, including a Tiffany pearl necklace and a pink women's sweater. 5 minutes later, Davey reported a burglary at his own home. Police looked for connections between the crimes and released images of possible suspects. Davey was confident in the police's efforts to catch his wife's killer, and investigators were hopeful that promising leads would soon lead to the perpetrator. The key clues that helped track down the suspects were a stolen pink sweater, cell phone records, and an ATM receipt. These were found in a stolen Chrysler Sebring, recovered near the Blackburns' home. The debit card on the receipt matched one of Amanda's stolen cards. The investigation into the crime led to a crucial discovery when a search warrant was obtained to review the ATM camera footage. The video showed the driver covering his face with a stolen pink sweater. By combining DNA testing, surveillance footage, and eyewitness accounts, the police were able to identify the suspects. DNA analysis of the sweater revealed that Jaylen Watson was one of the individuals involved. This identification was a significant milestone in the case. Further investigation involved obtaining cell phone records. Watson's phone number was already in the database due to a previous burglary conviction for which he was on parole. The records of Diano Gordon's cell phone were also obtained. The data showed that both Watson's and Gordon's phones were in the vicinity of the crime scene when the incident occurred. Moreover, the phone records indicated that Gordon and Watson were near the Chase Bank, where Amanda's debit card was used on the day of the murder. The final piece of evidence fell into place with the identification of Larry Taylor. By examining surveillance footage in the area, the police were able to identify Taylor's phone number and subsequently trace his address. Following the incident, a new development emerged when a gun was reportedly found near the Blackburn home. A man handed the gun over to the Broad Ripple Fire Department, claiming to have discovered it outside the home. Forensic experts analyzed the gun, and after 2 weeks of investigation, police arrested 18-year-old Larry Taylor and 21-year-old Jaylen Watson for Amanda Blackburn's murder. A third suspect, 24-year-old Diano Gordon, was taken into custody for a parole violation, but he was not charged with a felony since he did not enter the Blackburn home. Once the crime lab results were in, it was confirmed that the gun found near the victim's home was the murder weapon. All 3 suspects were apprehended. When questioned, Larry Taylor admitted to shooting the woman twice because she allegedly jumped on him and he feared she would scratch him. He then shot her in the back of the head as she lay on the ground and proceeded to watch her bleed to death. A criminal trio, consisting of Taylor, Watson, and Gordon, targeted the Blackburn house on November 10th with the intention of stealing money. The husband had left the front door unlocked when he went to the gym, making it an easy target. Upon entering, they confronted Amanda and Taylor, hit her with a gun to subdue her. Watson and Gordon, feeling uneasy, decided to leave and use the stolen bank cards to withdraw cash from an ATM. They attempted to get $500 from one ATM, but were unsuccessful, and then managed to withdraw $1,400 from another. Their actions were caught on CCTV. The duo returned to the Blackburn house to pick up Taylor, but in their absence, Amanda regained consciousness and fought back against her attacker. Taylor tackled her to the ground and later admitted to shooting her. After the crime, Taylor placed the stolen debit cards in an accomplice's car. The Blackburn home was the 3rd target of the day for the trio. Earlier, they had broken into a house where the resident was asleep, stealing a laptop, wallet, and car. They were caught on camera, but ignored it and moved on. Their next target was another home, which they broke into through a patio window, stealing 4 TVs, a laptop, jewelry, and some unusual items, including a bag of oranges and a pink sweater that would eventually help the police identify them. Court documents revealed the evidence gathered by police against the suspects. The most crucial piece of evidence was Jaylen Watson's DNA, found on a pink sweater used to cover his face during a surveillance video. The sweater was stolen during the second burglary, and Watson used it to conceal his identity while trying to withdraw cash with Amanda Blackburn's stolen bank card. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Watson and Diano Gordon cooperated with the investigation. Larry Taylor, however, waived his right to remain silent and admitted to being near the burglary scene. Although he claimed to be confused, he could not provide a clear alibi. The county prosecutor formally filed charges against the suspects. Larry Taylor faces 13 charges, including felony murder for knowingly killing Amanda Blackburn. Jaylen Watson is charged with a felony, and both he and Taylor face multiple counts of burglary, robbery, and theft. Diano Gordon, already in custody for a parole violation, also faces burglary charges. A 4th individual was aware of the robberies, burglaries, and other crimes but did not participate. After questioning, this person was released. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department's Violent Crimes Unit collaborated with the Gang Unit and federal marshals to apprehend Taylor. Police Chief Rick Height commended the cooperative efforts that led to Taylor's arrest, praising the detectives who worked tirelessly to solve the city's murders without rest. Thanks to Assistant U.S. Attorney Josh Minkler and Prosecutor Terry Curry, justice was served, partly due to the victim's pregnancy. Prosecutors considered filing additional charges related to the fetus, although they found no evidence to support rape charges. Larry Taylor's first trial, held in December 2021, was cut short when it was discovered that a juror had discussed the case with fellow jurors. This led to a mistrial. The second trial, held in October 2022, featured a more rigorous jury selection process. Over 100 potential jurors were called and had to fill out a 16-page questionnaire to assess their ability to reach a fair verdict. Larry Joe Taylor was sentenced to 86 years in the Indiana State Correctional Institution for Amanda Blackburn's murder and additional burglary charges. Diano Gordon and Jaylen Watson agreed to plea deals and testified against Larry Taylor in court, receiving sentences ranging from 20 to 35 years in prison. Both Watson and Taylor are currently incarcerated in the Marion County Jail. In Indiana, a murder conviction can lead to 45 to 60 years in prison or even life imprisonment or the death penalty. Prosecutors sought to enhance Larry Taylor's sentence by 20 years due to the victim's pregnancy during the alleged crime. Davey Blackburn, Amanda's husband and a pastor, expressed relief that those responsible for her murder were caught and would not harm anyone else. Amanda's death had a significant impact, with thousands attending her funeral, including Governor Mike Pence. A donation page was set up to cover funeral and medical expenses. Davey Blackburn chose to forgive Amanda's killers, stating, "I choose the path of forgiveness, grace, and hope." Amanda's case garnered national and international media attention. After Amanda's death, Davey Blackburn transitioned from an unhappy husband to a popular blogger, capitalizing on his tragedy. He created podcasts and videos, sharing his experiences and pain. He became famous and wealthy, receiving an insurance payout and buying a new home. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nicole Lenway. Nicole Lenway, also known as Nikki Len Ford, was born on July 11, 1989, in a small town in Minnesota. There is little information available about her parents and early life. According to some reports, her father left the family when she was young, and her mother raised her alone, providing her with a good education. Nikki was an exceptional student and athlete, excelling in track and field and martial arts. She decided to dedicate her life to fighting crime and served in law enforcement. After graduating with honors from the police academy, she moved to Minneapolis and joined the Criminal Investigation Department as an assistant investigator. Colleagues described Nikki as a determined, goal-oriented woman and a fearless officer, ready to take risks. However, in her personal life, she became a pawn in the hands of a sophisticated manipulator. In 2012, at a martial arts competition, 23-year-old Nicole met Timothy "Tim" Ama, a coach and martial arts master who was 8 years her senior. Timothy, a gentleman man, won Nikki's heart with his charming nature and kind gestures. He demonstrated his reliability and care, making Nikki fall deeply in love with him. They started a romantic relationship and moved in together. Initially, everything was wonderful, and Nikki felt happy and loved. However, Timothy's behavior began to change gradually. He revealed his true nature, but subtly enough that Nikki wasn't alarmed at first. Behind his charming facade, Timothy was a sophisticated tormentor who enjoyed flirting with other women, even in Nikki's presence. This behavior hurt and humiliated Nikki, making her feel insecure. Nikki had hoped that Timothy would eventually settle down and become more restrained, but months passed and his behavior didn't change. He continued to flirt and engage in affairs, assuring Nikki that he loved only her. When Nikki confronted him, he would snap at her, saying she had no right to tell him what to do. He would later apologize, telling Nikki that no one would ever love her as much as he did, and she would forgive him. The situation escalated in the fall of 2014 when Timothy flew into a rage during a minor argument, grabbing Nikki by the throat and choking her until she almost lost consciousness. He then pushed her into a wall, making her realize that she was in an unhealthy relationship. However, her emotional attachment to Timothy was too strong, and she forgave him once again. Timothy's behavior towards Nikki was extremely controlling and jealous. He would constantly monitor her movements, check her phone and social media without her permission, and accuse her of infidelity without any evidence. Despite his own infidelity, he would manipulate Nikki into believing that no one would ever love her as much as he did, trapping her in the relationship. In November 2015, after a violent argument, Nikki gathered her belongings and left the house. Timothy, who didn't believe she would actually leave, chased her down, grabbed her by the hair, and dragged her back inside. However, Nikki's screams and struggles attracted the attention of their neighbors, forcing Timothy to back down. Finally, free from the abusive relationship, Nikki felt a sense of relief. But Timothy didn't give up. He shifted his tactics from threats and blackmail to romantic gestures, sending flowers and messages filled with tenderness, pleading for another chance. For a month, Nikki stood firm, refusing to return to him. However, her plans were disrupted when she discovered she was pregnant in December 2015. Nikki knew that if Timothy found out, he would use it to manipulate her into getting back together. She tried to keep her pregnancy a secret, but their mutual friends and acquaintances soon informed Timothy, who urged her to return to him, arguing that their child should grow up in a complete family. Nikki, who grew up without a father, understood the challenges of single parenthood, but she also recognized that being with a manipulative and cruel person like Timothy would be detrimental to her and the child. Despite still having feelings for him, she refused to reunite with her ex-boyfriend, but she did agree to let him participate in their child's life as a nominal father. Nicole gave birth to a healthy boy named Callahan Ammer on June 20, 2016. The father, Tim, acknowledged paternity and initially expressed a desire to raise the child with Nicole. However, it soon became clear that Tim was not interested in being a good father and only wanted to use the child as a tool to manipulate Nicole. Nicole took almost a year of maternity leave to care for her son, devoting herself entirely to motherhood. Meanwhile, Tim continued his carefree life with multiple lovers and casual connections. He even had a system in place where he would signal to his lovers when he was available by turning on a purple light in his bedroom. In 2016, Tim started living with his 18-year-old protege, Colin, who had been deeply in love with him since she was 14. Despite the significant age difference, the couple hid their relationship from outsiders, claiming Colin was just renting a room in Tim's house. By the summer of 2017, Nicole was forced to return to work as a forensic expert at the Maine Police Headquarters in Minneapolis. With her unpredictable work schedule, she would often ask Tim to look after their son, mainly because she believed it was beneficial for the boy to spend time with his father and to save on nanny costs. However, Tim would always shift the responsibility onto Colin, who developed a fondness for the little boy and enjoyed taking care of him. Tim would tell Colin that Nicole was a bad mother who didn't want to care for her child and was looking for excuses to offload her son onto them. In the spring of 2017, Nicole started a new romantic relationship with a fellow police officer named Donovan Ford, who treated her with tenderness and care and expressed a desire to adopt Callahan. However, when Tim found out about their relationship, he became enraged and decided to use their son and the naive Colin to destroy Nicole's new relationship. Tim would regularly report to social services that Donovan was abusing Callahan and that Nicole was doing nothing to stop it, resulting in frequent visits from Child Protective Services. For years, Nicole and her new partner were subjected to harassment and intimidation by her ex-boyfriend, Timothy, who falsely accused them of domestic violence. Timothy convinced Colin, a friend, that Nicole and her partner were a danger to their son, Callahan, and that they might harm him. Timothy continued to psychologically manipulate Colin, convincing him that Callahan was in danger and that Nicole and her partner were cruel to him. Meanwhile, Timothy harassed and threatened Nicole and her partner, even filing false police reports against them. Donovan tried to have a calm and rational conversation with Timothy, but it didn't work. Timothy continued to terrorize Nicole and her partner, making their lives a living hell. He eventually took the matter to court, claiming he wanted sole custody of their son. Nicole was terrified, knowing Timothy's ability to lie and manipulate. She understood that he didn't actually care about their son's well-being. He just wanted to punish her for moving on with her life. Meanwhile, Nicole decided to seek a restraining order against Timothy, citing his erratic behavior and the threat he posed to her and her family. She was confident that she would gain custody of their son, but she knew the legal battles could drag on for years. During this time, Timothy continued to concoct fabricated stories, including a false accusation that Nicole had tried to run him over with her car. However, he couldn't provide any evidence to support his claim. In September 2022, the custody case went to court, with Timothy accusing Nicole of harming their son. However, the court saw through his lies and awarded sole custody to Nicole. Despite this, Timothy persisted and appealed the decision. He was eventually allowed to see his son at a specialized family center designed to minimize conflict between parents. However, on April 19, 2022, when Nicole arrived at the family center to pick up her son, a mysterious attacker dressed in black clothing and a mask approached her, shot her 4 times at close range, and quickly disappeared. Incredibly, Nicole remained conscious and managed to call emergency services despite being severely injured. A woman happened to be driving by when she heard shots fired and saw a black figure jump into a vehicle and speed away. She immediately pulled over to ensure the shooter was gone, then rushed to help the victim, Nicole. The woman explained what had happened to the dispatcher, provided the address, and pressed her clothing against Nicole's wounds to stop the bleeding, ultimately saving her life. Nicole spent several days in a coma, teetering on the brink of life and death. She lost a lot of blood and her vital organs were affected, but doctors managed to stabilize her condition. Medical professionals believed Nicole was incredibly lucky, as death was only millimeters away from 2 bullets. One passed near an artery and the other nearly struck her heart. When Nicole regained consciousness, she reported to the police that her ex-lover, Timothy, was the one who had shot her. The police interrogated Timothy, who had a solid alibi since he was at the family center with his son at the time of the attack, as confirmed by staff and internal surveillance footage. The investigation also explored the possibility that someone among the criminals Nicole had previously arrested might have organized the attack. 4 casings were found at the scene, and a camera at the nearest intersection captured a suspicious black Dodge Ram pickup running a red light without license plates. An eyewitness reported seeing the same vehicle, which led the police to check what vehicles Timothy owned. During another interrogation, Timothy mentioned owning a Chevrolet Traverse SUV and a Dodge Challenger, but not a pickup. However, the investigation revealed that Timothy was lying, and a black Dodge Ram, identical to the one used by the shooter, was registered in his name. When shown the surveillance footage, Timothy admitted to owning the pickup, but claimed he rarely used it. The vehicle was equipped with colorful stickers, which were verified, but appeared to have been applied recently. While all the evidence was circumstantial, the police needed to find the weapon and the actual shooter to fully resolve the case. It was discovered that Timothy's vehicle had a satellite navigation system, allowing the tracing of the vehicle's entire route. The system revealed that the car was brought to the back entrance of a Tando school on the evening of April 18th, where it remained all night and almost the entire next day. Road cameras traced the vehicle's route, showing it arrived with license plates. The evening after the incident, the car used in the crime was found, but without the perpetrators. The person who drove the car that day was short and slender, with a feminine silhouette from a distance. As a result, the police decided to detain and question Amma's live-in girlfriend, Colin Larson. A search of their home was also conducted, and although the weapon used in the crime was not found, the police discovered ammunition of the same caliber. Colin, who was frightened, soon began to give confessional testimony, confirming that Timothy was the mastermind behind the crime. However, Colin believed that Timothy had acted with good intentions, thinking they were trying to save little Callahan from a cruel mother. Timothy had spent years manipulating Colin, convincing her that the boy was being mistreated and subjected to violence, and she unquestioningly believed every word. She felt sorry for the child and believed that Timothy wanted to protect him. The trial of the conspirators began in November of the same year. Colin confessed that Timothy had provided her with the firearm and had taken it back after the assassination attempt, but she didn't know what he did with it. The prosecution was largely built on circumstantial evidence, but Colin's confession was the decisive factor. The court also considered the testimony of the victim, Nicole, about Timothy's manipulative nature and his ability to deceive the women who loved him. Timothy Ama was found guilty of organizing a first-degree attempted murder, as well as incitement and aiding and abetting, and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Colin Larson received 16 years in prison as the executive. A year after the assassination attempt, Nicole fully recovered physically and emotionally. She and Donovan officially legalized their relationship, and he became a loving father to Callahan. The now married Ford couple is expecting their first child together, and the woman who saved Nicole's life will be the child's godmother. It should be added that Timothy will be eligible for parole in 2035, but he will be prohibited from coming within 100 meters of his son, former lover, and her family members, and from attempting any form of contact with. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lindsay Burbeck. Sarah and her boyfriend Brandon arrived at her mother Lindsay's home for a scheduled tea party, but no one answered the door. This was unusual, so Sarah tried to contact her mother several times, but there was no response. She sent 2 text messages, "Where are you?" and a series of question marks, but still received no answer. After waiting outside for an hour, Sarah called her father, Tim Burbeck, to report that her mother was missing and not answering her phone. Tim picked up Sarah and Brandon and took them to his house around midnight. Sarah and Tim then returned to Lindsay's house with a spare set of keys, but found no signs of her or any indication of what might have happened. The house was in order, with no note of explanation. At 12:11 a.m. on August 13th, Tim reported Lindsay missing to the police, telling the dispatcher that his ex-wife was missing and could not be found. The disappearance of Lindsay shook the small suburban community to its core. In response, hundreds of people from the community banded together to search for her. The search party consisted of men and women, grandparents, dog walkers, teenagers with bicycles, and mothers with strollers. Despite most of them not knowing Lindsay personally, they were determined to find her. For 2 consecutive days, people gathered at Copus, fueled by hope of finding a crucial clue that could solve the mystery of her disappearance. After days of searching, posting appeals on social media, and putting up posters, the community's efforts continued unabated. However, as the days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that the search would be a challenging one. With each passing day, the chances of finding Lindsay alive grew slimmer. The detectives classified Lindsay as high risk, given that she had never gone missing before, and her family described her disappearance as uncharacteristic of her. Nevertheless, the search party refused to give up, driven by their determination to find Lindsay. The local community quickly sprang into action, printing and distributing thousands of posters featuring Lindsay's face throughout the neighborhood. A Facebook group dedicated to the search also rapidly gained popularity, reaching 10,000 members within hours of the police appeal being posted online. As a result, posters were soon plastered on every available surface, including lampposts, storefronts, and traffic lights, calling for the public's help in finding Lindsay. The police launched a comprehensive investigation into her disappearance from her home, involving specialist officers, dog handlers, firefighters, mountain rescue teams, volunteers, and the city's search and rescue team. They scoured the area around Copus and the surrounding countryside, using drones and helicopters to search popular walking and running routes. 4 days after Lindsay vanished, the police released CCTV footage showing her last known movements. The footage, captured at 4:10 p.m. on Burnley Road, showed her walking towards Copus, wearing a distinctive purple jacket, black leggings, and dark sneakers with white soles. As the search entered its 7th day, hopes of finding Lindsay alive were dwindling. Despite the extensive efforts, the police had yet to uncover any leads on her whereabouts. However, they stressed that there was no evidence to suggest she had fallen victim to a crime, leaving open the possibility that she might still be found alive. The search for Lindsay Burbeck continued into the evening, with hundreds of local residents joining the first mass public search of Copus after a social media appeal. The breakthrough came when a local resident's dog ran into a wooded area in Arrington Cemetery. The dog's strange behavior, sniffing and digging, caught its owner's attention. As the owner approached, they were met with a horrific sight, something soft and unidentifiable underfoot, accompanied by a terrible smell and swarms of flies. Peering closer, the owner saw a foot protruding from the ground, surrounded by earth and grass, wrapped in clear plastic bags. On August 24th, 12 days after Lindsay's disappearance, her body was discovered in the cemetery, buried in a shallow grave. The gruesome discovery marked the end of the search for Lindsay and the beginning of a murder investigation. Dr. Naomi Carter, a pathologist, performed an autopsy on Lindsay's body and concluded that the cause of death was a broken neck, inflicted with extreme force that crushed the larynx. The injury was likely caused by a foot or knee strike. Additionally, there were signs of an attempt to amputate Lindsay's right leg with a saw after her death, resulting in a deep laceration down to the bone. Despite the poor condition of the body, Dr. Carter found that Lindsay's injuries were catastrophic. However, she could not rule out the possibility of sexual activity on the day of Lindsay's disappearance due to the advanced state of decomposition. Before Lindsay's body was discovered, the police and members of the public had searched the area for several days without finding anything. During the search, community volunteers and a police dog handler reported seeing a blue wheelie garbage can abandoned in nearby bushes, but its significance was not yet understood. On August 20th, at 9 p.m., volunteers searching the cemetery found a dumpster with a dark stain on the outside, which they suspected might be blood. They took photos and called the police. 2 officers arrived, inspected the dumpster, and found a brown mark that they believed was dirt. Despite this, they decided the dumpster looked new, and there was no evidence linking it to Lindsay's disappearance, so they left it in place. Around the same time, other important clues were discovered in the cemetery, but initially overlooked. On August 18th, local resident Christine Alderson found a bloody cloth on the grass while walking her dogs with her daughter. Although she thought the fresh red blood might belong to a homeless man who frequented the area, she still reported it. Another dog walker, Judith Bibby, found red clothing hanging on a barbed wire fence near the Cardinal Hill Trail, which was likely Lindsay's jacket. She also heard a child's voice, but no signs of struggle, yelling, or screaming. On August 25th, investigators returned to the crime scene and discovered a yellow-handled saw and a pair of green heavy-duty gloves near Lindsay's grave. The gloves had traces of blood on them, and upon forensic testing, the results showed that the gloves contained the perpetrator's DNA on the inside surfaces, while Lindsay's DNA was found on the outside surface of the left glove. Additionally, a pair of Lindsay's Skechers sneakers, which had been cut along the sole, were found in a blue plastic bag discarded in the cemetery. Further analysis of the evidence revealed that Lindsay's body had been wrapped in plastic sheeting, and beneath the sheeting, foliage and grass not native to the cemetery grounds were found. This led investigators to conclude that Lindsay's body had been moved from a different location before being buried in the cemetery. During the investigation, detectives remembered a blue trash can that had caught volunteers' attention. Reviewing CCTV footage, they made a surprising discovery: a young man pulling a blue wheelie garbage can in the Burley Road area multiple times. The same camera caught him visiting the cemetery 4 times. A suspect emerged, and footage of him carrying a trash can sparked a stir when broadcast on the news. The public helped identify the 16-year-old, who surrendered to police the same day. Rocky Marciano Price, a local resident, was the boy in the videotape. He lived with his parents and 5 siblings in their family home of 3 decades on Winnie Hill Road in Arrington. Rocky had several mental health conditions, including autism, attention deficit disorder, and hyperactivity, which he had struggled with since childhood. His low IQ added to his learning and communication challenges. Rocky attended an alternative school in Barnoldswick a few days a week, where teachers described him as quiet and nonverbal. A 2015 psychologist's report found that Rocky had a limited understanding of his emotions and emotional well-being. He struggled to connect events and emotions. A 2016 report stated that Rocky was unresponsive to strangers and required constant supervision and care. His teachers, including Timothy Bradley, who taught at the school for 18 months, tried to engage Rocky in his education, but he preferred hands-on activities to academic subjects. Rocky rarely participated in conversations, even when discussing topics that interested him. Despite this, he was physically strong and tough for his age. He enjoyed activities like going to the gym, tending to the family's chickens, watching movies, and playing Xbox. Rocky seemed to exist in his own world, often unaware of his actions. Rocky Price randomly targeted Lindsay, killing her simply because she was lonely in the wrong place at the wrong time. On the first anniversary of the crime, August 12, 2020, Price went on trial and was unanimously found guilty by a jury after an 8-day retrial and 4 hours of deliberation. Although Price admitted to helping dispose of Lindsay's body, he claimed he had no role in her murder. He stated that a stranger approached him and asked for his help in burying the body in exchange for payment. However, evidence found at his home in Arrington contradicted his claim, including plastic bags identical to those found at Lindsay's grave. Additionally, a tracksuit and other clothing found at his home matched the outfit he wore on surveillance cameras on August 12th, 16th, and 17th, further implicating him in the crime. Defense attorney Mark Fenn Halls argued that Rocky Price, although responsible for burying the victim's body in the cemetery, was not her killer. Despite substantial evidence, Price pleaded not guilty to the crime, but admitted to moving the body. During the trial, Price, through his attorney, provided a statement explaining his movements between the crime scene in Copus and the cemetery where the body was found. However, the prosecutor maintained that Price acted alone. The motive behind the random attack on 47-year-old mother of 2, Lindsay, was never revealed, as the perpetrator did not know the victim. The judge sentenced Price to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. He will be eligible for release when the parole board deems him no longer a danger to society. The judge described the attack as swift and brutal, stating that Price clearly intended to kill a woman who was walking alone just minutes before Lindsay's incident. Meanwhile, another woman, Zoe Braithwaite, had a narrow escape from a similar attack. She encountered a suspicious teenager wearing a hood and walking alone on a parallel path. Her instincts kicked in, and she became wary of the individual, noticing that he looked out of place for a walk in the woods at that time of year. She quickened her pace and eventually ran away, likely saving her own life. The judge noted that if it hadn't been Zoe, it could have been someone else, and it was unfortunately Lindsay who fell victim. This was a calculated and intentional attack. After attempting to target one woman, he deliberately pursued another lone woman. His actions after the crime reveal his ability to think and plan. His teachers testified that he excelled in practical tasks, which he utilized to conceal the body. Rocky Price made 2 trips to Copus on the evening of August 12th. At 6:55 p.m., he was caught on CCTV cameras carrying a black backpack, possibly containing a saw to dismember Lindsay's body. Later, at 8:28 p.m., dog walker Anthony Doe witnessed him pulling out an empty trash can from the same location where his grandfather and other family members are buried. Without showing any signs of panic or excitement, Rocky Price executed a premeditated plan to dispose of Lindsay's body. He placed her in a blue trash can, dragged her to the cemetery, and spent over an hour burying her near the railroad line. He left behind a saw, gloves, and a trash can at the scene. The senseless and brutal murder of a stranger in broad daylight is deeply disturbing to society. The random nature of the attack and his prior stalking of another woman demonstrate that he poses a significant threat to the public. Rocky Marciano Price's name and photo were published for the first time after a judge lifted restrictions following his guilty verdict. Previously, his identity was kept secret due to his young age. Although the jury knew details about Price, they were not fully disclosed until after the verdict. Price's mental illness does not excuse his actions, as he knew killing was wrong. Lindsay's funeral was held at St. Margaret's Church in Hapton on September 20th, where over 200 mourners gathered to pay their respects. As police directed traffic on Manchester Road, Lindsay's coffin, adorned with flowers, was carried into the church. The outpouring of sympathy was evident in the dozens of bouquets from friends, family, and strangers alike left at the scene in her memory. According to her daughter Sarah, Lindsay was a woman full of optimism and positivity, always looking forward to the future. In fact, she had plans to visit Glasgow with her friend Sharon and was hoping to find love on the Match.com dating site. Tragically, her bright future was cut short on a sunny summer day. Rocky Price's fascination with death and mutilation may be a symptom of a deeper issue, such as autism. This neurodevelopmental disorder can cause difficulties with social interaction, motor skills, and repetitive behaviors, leading to withdrawal and isolation. While the exact cause is unclear, the consequences of Rocky's actions fit the severity of his crime, including burying Lindsay's mutilated body. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michaela Gerecht. On November 19, 1988, Michaela, then 9 years old, and her friend Katrina were busy trying on different outfits for an upcoming school performance at their homes. The joy was palpable as it marked the beginning of the Thanksgiving break. Around 10 a.m., Katrina's dad gave her $5 to buy some candy. The two friends rushed to Michaela's house to ask her mom if they could visit the nearby store, which was less than a mile away. Although they had been to the store many times before, with family or older neighbors, Michaela's mom was hesitant to let them go alone, citing their young age and lack of experience. After some cajoling, Michaela's mom finally agreed, on the condition that they would purchase the candy and head straight back home. As Michaela was her parents' long-awaited first child, a true miracle, her mom was particularly concerned about her safety. Despite her reservations, Michaela's mom believed that nothing bad would happen, given the store's proximity and their plan to ride their scooters there. Michaela raced back to Katrina's house. They planned to use 2 scooters, so Katrina took hers and borrowed another one from her brother. They went to the store, parked their scooters nearby, and went inside to make their purchases. When they came out, they got engrossed in conversation and completely forgot about their scooters. They started walking home but quickly realized their mistake and returned to where they had left the scooters. That's when they noticed Michaela's scooter was missing. Assuming someone had moved it, they decided to search the store area from different angles. Michaela scanned the parking lot and soon spotted her scooter next to a car parked a short distance from the store. As she approached it, Katrina suddenly heard a terrifying scream. She ran back and saw a man grabbing Michaela and forcing her into the car beside her scooter. The man promptly got back in the driver's seat and sped off. Shaken, Katrina rushed into the store and alerted the cashier about the incident. The cashier immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene within minutes. The store employee also contacted Michaela's father, as they were acquainted, and informed him of the situation. Michaela's father, accompanied by Katrina's father, hurried to the store where investigators had already gathered. He instructed his wife to remain at home by the phone, awaiting a possible call from the police. The detectives faced a multitude of challenges from the outset. The lack of surveillance cameras near the store and the sole witness, Katrina, who was in a state of deep shock and barely able to speak, hindered their progress. Her father was permitted to take her home, leaving the store cashier as the initial lead. She recounted a suspicious individual loitering around the store shortly before the abduction. He had parked his car, exited, but never entered the store, instead opting to walk along the building, peering through windows and seemingly watching them. The cashier had a gut feeling that he might be planning to rob her. Based on her description, the man was white, approximately 30 years old, and sported a prominent mustache. He arrived in an old maroon-colored sedan, but the model and license plate number remained unclear. After gathering the suspect's description, the police created a composite sketch and disseminated it to the media. News of the abduction spread rapidly throughout the city and beyond, leaving the public shocked that such a brazen act could occur in a busy area. The police also shared the sketch and a description of the suspect's car with hundreds of patrol officers across the county. Officers began stopping vehicles matching the description, hoping to find her alive. Meanwhile, the detectives turned over Maya's scooter to forensic experts for analysis. They suspected that the kidnapper had witnessed Maya and Katrina's arrival at the store and strategically positioned one of the scooters near the back door of his car to facilitate the abduction. This led them to believe that his fingerprints might be on the scooter, and indeed they discovered a fingerprint that didn't match anyone in Katrina's family or the 9-year-old girl. However, there was a hitch. The fingerprint was incomplete, making it challenging to conduct a database search at the time, as the technology wasn't sophisticated enough for such procedures. As a result, the police had to rely on direct comparisons with potential suspects. By the evening of the abduction, the FBI had joined the investigation, prompted by a surge in child disappearances, not only in Hayward but also in surrounding cities. They suspected a link between Michaela's case and these other vanishings. Despite the FBI's involvement and widespread media attention, little progress was made in locating the missing girl. Michaela's parents were understandably heartbroken, and her mother was consumed by guilt, replaying the events leading up to the abduction. In particular, she recalled an unsettling incident just a week prior, where Michaela had risen unusually early, sat at the kitchen table, and claimed to be writing a poem. This was peculiar, given her daughter's usual sleep patterns, and the poem's theme, people being abducted and hidden in attics but not killed, seemed eerily prescient. At the time, her mother had found it strange for a 9-year-old to conceive such ideas, but in hindsight, it took on an uncanny, almost prophetic quality, leaving her to wonder if Michaela had unwittingly foreseen her own fate. In the 2 days following the abduction, the police launched an exhaustive search for the suspect and the missing girl, but despite their best efforts, they failed to make any progress. In a bid to gather more information, they decided to re-interview Katrina, hoping that time might have jogged her memory. However, this decision led to a perplexing twist. The girl who witnessed the abduction and the cashier provided contradictory descriptions of the kidnapper's appearance. Katrina described the man as around 20 years old, with long, unkempt, light-colored hair that reached his shoulders and a face covered in pimples. She also remembered his piercing blue eyes, reminiscent of a fox's. Furthermore, she recalled some details about the car, a beige sedan with a boxy shape and numerous dents. In contrast, the cashier's suspicion had been sparked by a man near the store whose description was vastly different from Katrina's. This discrepancy presented a significant challenge for the investigators, who had already circulated an inaccurate composite sketch of the suspect through the media, and to patrol officers, leading the search for an entirely different individual. This unfolding drama took place within the critical first 48 hours following the abduction, the most crucial period for a swift resolution. Based on her description, they promptly created a new composite sketch and redistributed it. Additionally, the police decided to interview all men in the area with prior convictions for sexual offenses. Numerous volunteers also joined the efforts, going door to door to interview residents in the hopes of someone recognizing the abductor or providing any other relevant information. They posted thousands of flyers featuring her photo and a description of the incident. And in just the initial few days, a staggering 42,000 of these flyers were distributed. After several days, they received their first promising lead. 3 individuals contacted them, reporting a hiking trip in a vast national park near their city. During their excursion, the hikers stumbled upon footprints on the ground, distinguishing one set belonging to an adult and another to a child. They decided to follow these tracks, eventually coming across a blanket and empty fast food wrappers deep in the forest. The police considered the possibility that these tracks might be connected to Maya and her abductor. The FBI's psychological profile also suggested that the abductor would likely take his victim to a secluded location, far removed from civilization. Given the park's size and its proximity to the city, it seemed to align perfectly with this theory. Detectives decided to conduct a thorough search of the park, utilizing all available resources. They scoured the ground, while helicopters equipped with thermal imaging scanned the area from above. However, all their efforts yielded nothing, as they couldn't find her or any incriminating evidence. The police extended their search to other parks, mountains, and remote areas, but all leads proved futile. Meanwhile, the case's nationwide media coverage sparked a deluge of tips, with over 4,000 received within the first month alone. Investigators faced the daunting task of pursuing each lead, a challenge that proved overwhelming. The case was a hot topic of discussion among San Francisco's neighboring residents and nearby cities, with prominent figures even making public appeals for information. As the search continued, a substantial $70,000 reward was offered, and Michaela's photograph was plastered on millions of milk cartons across the state. Despite the massive community effort and numerous leads, detectives made little headway. By December's end, a month and a half into the investigation, the police had only managed to exhaust thousands of leads, with no progress made in the following months. Still, the police, along with Michaela's mother, who had launched her own investigation, studying similar cases and searching for possible suspects, persisted in their efforts, holding on to the hope that Michaela was still alive, being held captive by her abductor. In 1991, detectives focused on 43-year-old Timothy Binder, and the deeper they dug into his background, the more disturbing it became. Before Michaela's abduction, Binder was already under police suspicion due to his odd behavior. He had been sending gifts, letters, and money to several young girls, with some of these letters featuring highlighted Bible passages that included phrases like, "I have chosen you," and "be with me." Parents of some of these girls grew concerned and reported him to the police, which led to an interrogation of Binder. He claimed he was simply trying to befriend these girls, thinking they were lonely. However, the investigation uncovered a worrying history. In 1985, Binder was fired from his job in Child Protective Services in Colorado for collecting personal information about young girls and then sending them gifts and letters. A search of his van revealed many photographs of children and Bible passages decorating the interior. Additionally, Binder had previously been arrested for trying to lure 2 girls into his van, although no charges were filed. Furthermore, he regularly visited local cemeteries, spending an unusual amount of time at the graves of young girls. 6 months before Michaela was abducted, a 7-year-old girl named Amber vanished in the same area. Binder got in touch with Amber's mother, offering to help and frequently visiting her home. He even sent a letter to the police, predicting that the next girl to go missing would be 9 years old. Months later, Michaela, who was also 9, was abducted. After she disappeared, Binder contacted her mother repeatedly, visited her home, and offered his assistance. But the disturbing pattern continued. In early December 1988, Binder sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler he had spoken to before, and the card showed a girl holding up 4 fingers. Shortly after, a 4-year-old girl went missing in the same town. Despite these disturbing circumstances, which comprised circumstantial evidence, detectives secured a search warrant for Binder's home, where he resided with his wife. Unfortunately, their search yielded no concrete leads linking him to the abductions. When news of Binder's peculiar behavior hit the newspapers, the public began to suspect he might be a serial killer, resulting in harassment and attacks on him and his family. He subsequently sued the city authorities for disseminating misinformation and emerged victorious. Detectives persisted in investigating Binder for several months, but ultimately concluded that there was no concrete evidence implicating him in these crimes. Some detectives believed that he posed no threat to children, and his unusual behavior might have been unrelated to these cases. Consequently, the police shifted their focus towards alternative suspects. A new substantial lead did not emerge until December 1992, 4 years after Michaela's disappearance. An inmate from Indiana, serving time for robbery, contacted the police, claiming to know the identity of her abductor. He stated that he had helped bury her body in the same park where traces of evidence had been discovered. Initially, investigators showed little interest in this tip, but when the inmate wrote a letter to a prominent San Francisco newspaper, the police faced harsh criticism, and under public pressure, they reluctantly decided to interview him. He promised not only to pinpoint Michaela's exact burial site, but also to lead them directly to the killer. The inmate was transferred to California, where he collaborated with the police on a search mission. He claimed that the body was buried in a gladiolus field, and the officers devoted all their resources to scouring that area. The search lasted 8 hours, until the inmate unexpectedly confessed that he had fabricated the entire story. He explained that his intention was to bring some comfort to Michaela's family and help them find closure. However, Michaela's relatives and the police were outraged by his false statement. As a consequence, the inmate received an additional 6.5-year prison sentence, nearly doubling his original sentence, and was ordered to pay Michaela's family $6,000 in compensation. In August 2000, a new lead emerged in the case with the arrest of Curtis Anderson, suspected of murdering a 7-year-old girl in Valo a year earlier. He confessed to the crime and was imprisoned. However, detectives harbored suspicions that he might be responsible for similar crimes. For 7 years, no concrete evidence supported this theory until Curtis reached out to the FBI. Weakened by poor health, he wanted to confess to additional crimes before his demise. His confession revealed that he had killed 13 more girls and women, including 7-year-old Amber, who vanished 6 months before Michaela. Curtis provided specific details that made investigators take his involvement seriously. Nonetheless, proving his guilt remained a daunting task, as there was no physical evidence and the victims' bodies remained unfound. Regarding Michaela's case, Curtis denied any involvement, despite his car's striking resemblance to Katrina's description. Although FBI agents planned to continue questioning him, Curtis passed away in 2012, halting the investigation. A new lead emerged when an inmate contacted the police, suggesting that his associate Lauren Herzog bore a remarkable likeness to the composite sketch of the suspect. Detectives were intrigued, given Lauren and his partner's conviction for multiple murders they committed together. Although suspected of killing 19 people, investigators could only prove some of these crimes. Notably, Lauren had taken his own life in prison a month before the inmate came forward. Undeterred, the police investigated Lauren's potential involvement. A younger photo of Lauren did resemble the composite sketch, but detectives required more concrete evidence. They proceeded to excavate a well where Lauren and his partner had disposed of their victims' bodies. The excavation yielded thousands of bone fragments, which medical experts meticulously examined. After extensive analysis, it was determined that the bones belonged to 5 different girls, but none matched Michaela's DNA. Despite excavating multiple wells, the police were unable to find any evidence linking Lauren to the case. In 2018, a significant breakthrough emerged in the case. David Mitch, a man already imprisoned for killing his 39-year-old girlfriend in 1989, was charged with the murders of 2 women in 1986 near Michaela's town. The key to this development was modern DNA analysis, which enabled investigators to link David to these crimes by analyzing biological material found under the victim's nails, something that was impossible back then. Detectives decided to investigate his possible involvement in Michaela's case and found several intriguing connections. They discovered that David was in the same area when Michaela was abducted, matching Katrina's description and driving a similar car. Since David's fingerprints were already on record, experts re-examined the partial fingerprint found on Michaela's scooter. Thanks to modern technology, they made a significant breakthrough. The fingerprint on the scooter perfectly matched David's. By 2020, the hope of Michaela being alive had faded, and David was charged with her murder. He denied his involvement, and the case went to trial in early 2023. Preliminary hearings took place, and the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed with the trial. David's lawyer attempted to challenge the evidence, claiming that the scooter's fingerprint didn't necessarily link his client to the crime. However, given the circumstances, this argument seemed dubious, as it was apparent that the abductor had deliberately left the scooter near the car's back door to ambush her when she approached. The defense also tried to contest the murder charges, as Michaela's body was never found, implying a lack of proof of her death. However, this argument held little weight, as numerous modern cases have resulted in convictions without the recovery of the victim's body, given the substantial evidence. Furthermore, David had a history of violent crimes throughout his life. Michaela's father traveled from out of state to attend the press conference announcing the arrest of his daughter's kidnapper. Unfortunately, Michaela's mother, who had held on to hope of finding her daughter alive all these years, was unable to attend as she battled cancer. Shortly after the news of the arrest, she passed away, thanking the investigators for uncovering the truth before her life's end. The police pledged to continue searching for Michaela's remains, offering a $10,000 reward for any valuable information that could lead to her discovery. David's trial is about to start and will cover 3 separate cases: the murder of Michaela and 2 other cases where his DNA was found under the victim's fingernails. Initially, the prosecution pushed for the death penalty, but when the district attorney changed, the new one decided not to pursue it. If David is found guilty of all 3 murders, he will not receive a life sentence, but rather a prison sentence of several decades. This decision has outraged the victims, families, and garnered significant media attention, with David's lawyer being the only one to support this change. However, considering David is already 62 years old, it's unlikely he will live to see the end of even this reduced sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jamie Melgar. Sandra Melgar often lies in her small prison cell, reflecting on the unexpected turns her life has taken. She never thought she'd become a widow and a suspect in her husband's murder. It's unbelievable that a year and a half after his death, a grand jury indicted her, and nearly 5 years later, a jury convicted her based on circumstantial evidence alone, with no clear motive or physical proof linking her to the crime. At 59, every day since her husband's passing has been a living nightmare. In a recent interview, Sandra said that she still catches herself thinking she'll go back home. Her blue eyes were red and puffy as tears streamed down her pale cheeks. She mentioned wanting to tell him things, forgetting he's gone. It doesn't feel like he's really gone. It's like he's temporarily away or on a trip. She added that she tries not to dwell on it, before pausing tearfully. Sandra has been incarcerated at the William P. Hobby Unit, a women's prison in rural Texas, for the past 10 months. Despite her circumstances, she has managed to stay connected with her friends and family, many of whom remain convinced of her innocence. She regularly talks to her daughter, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose, although the noisy prison atmosphere and her soft voice often make their conversations difficult. Sandra also keeps in touch with her friends through letters, and they update her on her Pomeranian, Lola, who was present at her house on the night of the incident. Most weekends, Liz's mother, Sandra, gets to spend a couple of hours with a rotating group of friends and family, thanks to the efforts of one of her closest friends who coordinates these weekly visits. Liz acts as her mother's strongest advocate, taking it upon herself to speak on her behalf and passionately discussing what she sees as a grave injustice that has taken a devastating toll on her mother's life, depriving her of both her husband and her own freedom. Sandra is haunted by the memories of the fateful night of December 23, 2012, when her husband met his tragic end. Her inability to recall the events of that night has sparked suspicions among investigators who find it suspicious. Despite this, Sandra remains resolute in her assertion that she did not commit the crime. As Sandra lies in her prison cell, her thoughts often wander back to the evening she and Jamie had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary on December 23, 2012. That night, Sandra Melgar was jolted awake by the incessant barking of their dogs, her vision blurred as she struggled to orient herself in the dimly lit room. Her body ached and her head throbbed as she lay on the closet floor, her hands and feet bound behind her back, her undergarments soiled. Sandra, at 5 feet 4 inches tall, attempted to stretch out her legs and roll over to look through a gap under her closet door. However, her bindings and the 2 hip replacements she had undergone restricted her movement. Even if she could manage to free herself, a chair had been placed in front of the door to block her access, with the door handle inaccessible from the outside. Inside the bedroom closet, Sandra's husband of 32 years, Jamie Melgar, lay dead, with 31 stab wounds on his hands and chest. The previously white walls of the closet were now stained with blood, and a gray telephone cord had been used to bind his feet together. A medical examiner's report confirmed that Jamie's injuries were all defensive wounds, indicating that he had fought back against his attacker rather than trying to escape. A particularly vicious blow had almost severed his right thumb, which likely caused the extensive blood spatter found in the closet and bedroom. The bedroom was in disarray, with dresser drawers open and contents scattered everywhere. Clothes, books, and pill bottles littered the floor. Sandra's black purse and red wallet had been rummaged through, and their contents were spread out on the blood-stained white comforter. A small white medic stool at the foot of the bed had bloodstains on it, suggesting it had been used as a makeshift surface for the attacker's knife. The back of a nearby wooden chair was also stained with blood. In the jacuzzi bathtub, where Sandra and Jamie had celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary the night before, several items bore witness to the tragic events. These included a white blouse, a green towel, and a silver chef knife with a 6-inch blade, all stained with blood droplets. The police later identified this knife as the murder weapon, which had been used just hours before the horrific events unfolded. Sandra and Jamie had been celebrating their 32 years of marriage with a romantic dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant. They had planned to continue their celebration in a relaxing way, with a jacuzzi session accompanied by candles, cocktails, strawberries, and whipped cream. Even after more than 3 decades together, their love for each other remained strong, as Sandra would later tell the authorities. The couple's journey began during their senior year at Lamar High School. Jamie, with his unruly black hair and a somewhat awkward teenage mustache, was immediately drawn to the 17-year-old Sandra, who had blue eyes and blonde hair and sat in front of him in class. At first, Sandra resisted Jamie's advances for weeks, but she eventually agreed to join him and a group of friends for ice skating. Unbeknownst to her, Jamie had orchestrated the whole event, and when she arrived, only Jamie and his best friend were there. The others had mysteriously disappeared. Jamie's charming nature, humor, and penchant for corny jokes eventually won Sandra over. She admired his intelligence, thoughtfulness, and sense of humor, while Jamie appreciated her intelligence, down-to-earth personality, and lack of pretentiousness. They soon became inseparable, and in 1980, 2 years after graduating from high school, they got married in a courthouse ceremony in downtown Houston. On the anniversary of their union, Sandra and Jamie spent a romantic evening in their jacuzzi, reminiscing about their shared history and dreaming of their future together. They discussed selling their home to embark on a world tour, visiting iconic destinations like the Grand Canyon and Ireland, and witnessing the breathtaking Northern Lights. With Jamie's retirement as a computer programmer with the Houston Independent School District just 5 months away, they envisioned buying a beachfront property where they could settle down after their travels. As they chatted, they took turns giving each other massages, culminating in a romantic moment of intimacy. After 2 blissful hours in the jacuzzi, their peaceful evening was abruptly interrupted by their dogs barking. Jamie got out of the jacuzzi, wrapped a towel around himself, and put on Sandra's slippers to attend to the dogs. Little did Sandra know that this would be the last time she would see her husband alive. When Sandra woke up approximately 15 hours later, she was horrified to find herself bound and gagged in her closet, her hands and feet tied, her body sore, and her undergarments soiled. Jamie was nowhere to be found, and the frantic barking of their dogs was now accompanied by unfamiliar voices inside her home. Sandra screamed out in desperation. Herman Melgar stood outside his brother Jaime's house, confused, just after 4:30 p.m. His brother had invited him and his family for dinner, but now, despite ringing the doorbell and calling, there was no response from Jaime or his wife Sandra. What struck Herman as unusual was that Jamie's black truck was parked in the driveway and Sandra's silver car was inside the open garage. He told his family to wait by the front door while he took a look around the backyard, glancing over the fence. Noticing the plastic tarp hanging from the pergola on the back porch, Herman remembered that Jamie had been working on various home improvement projects. Returning to the front yard, Herman decided to check the laundry room door inside the garage. To his surprise, the door was unlocked, so he entered the house. As he stepped inside, Herman was met with an unsettling atmosphere. The house was dimly lit, gray and stuffy, with all the blinds drawn shut. The dogs were barking and jumping around, which added to the eerie feeling that Herman's daughter Marissa would later describe as unsettling. It was at that moment that they heard muffled screams. Herman rushed to the back of the house and found a large chair propped against the bathroom closet door. Inside the closet, Sandra lay on the floor, wearing a black satin nightgown, desperately screaming for help. Herman and his wife Maria struggled to remove the tightly bound restraints from Sandra's arms and legs. Herman got a pair of scissors from the bathroom to help free her. Meanwhile, Sandra kept asking about Jamie's whereabouts. She had visible bruises on her arms, including a dark one on her left bicep. After they finally freed her, Sandra rushed into the bedroom and found Jamie's lifeless body protruding from the closet. She checked for a pulse, but it was clear from his cold, pale, and naked body that he had passed away. Sandra covered Jamie's body with a blue jacket, and Maria escorted her back to the bathroom. When the paramedics arrived, Sandra was in hysterics, making it difficult for her to communicate with Stephanie Roberts, the first paramedic to arrive on the scene. Roberts' report stated that Sandra was in shock, cried periodically, and had lost all sense of time. Her last memory was of around 1 a.m. that morning, unaware that 15 hours had passed and it was now evening. The police documented bruises on Sandra's hands and arms, as well as a small scratch on her left thumb, but found no blood on her. Sandra told the police that after Jamie let the dogs in, she got out of the bathtub and went to her closet to get dressed. Her next memory was waking up in the closet at an unknown time, and at some point she screamed for help, but then fell back asleep, possibly having a seizure. Sandra had several underlying medical conditions, including lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures, which had forced her to resign from her job as a licensed vocational nurse. She believed she could no longer perform her duties effectively due to her seizures. In the weeks leading up to Jamie's murder, Sandra had experienced auras, which she knew were warning signs of an impending seizure. During these seizures, she would sleep for hours and wake up in a state of confusion, disorientation, and severe pain. As crime scene investigators carefully searched the house, Sandra was taken to an interrogation room at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. She mentioned that the room was too cold and was subsequently asked to take a polygraph test. Sergeants Cazal and Douay questioned her for 3 hours, focusing on the 36 hours leading up to Jamie's death. Sandra spoke quietly and complained of a headache during the interrogation. She remembered some details clearly, such as removing her boots in the bedroom, changing in the bathroom, and recalling their conversation in the jacuzzi. However, she struggled to remember other details, and her recollection of time was imprecise. When questioned about the timeline, Sandra initially stated that Jamie had left her for 15 minutes to let the dogs in before she got out of the jacuzzi. Later, she suggested it might have been around 5 minutes. Sandra admitted that she was not good at estimating time and was making an educated guess. 2 days after the murder, Liz met with Cazal and Douay to report that several items were missing from the house, including a TV from the bedroom and Sandra's medication bottles of hydrocodone and phenobarbital. She reminded them that a backpack containing a gaming system and games had been left in the garage, which she had previously mentioned to detectives. Liz also shared information about her mother's seizures and health issues, expressing her concern for her mother's fragile state and possible post-traumatic stress. Although she hoped that something might trigger a memory later, this meeting did not yield any significant breakthroughs. Liz continued to follow up with phone calls, even pointing out damage to one of her parents' rental homes. However, the authorities eventually stopped responding to her inquiries, leaving both Liz and Sandra unaware of the investigation's progress. A year and a half after the incident, Sandra was secretly indicted for Jamie's murder by a grand jury in July 2014. Because of state law, grand jury proceedings are confidential, keeping the public unaware of the discussions and evidence presented during the process. Despite the indictment, Sandra's case progressed slowly over the next 3 years, involving at least 4 prosecutors from the district attorney's office, until it was assigned to Colleen Barnett in May 2017. Colleen Barnett had rejoined the DA's office in January of that year, following a 4-year break during Kim A's tenure as district attorney. Throughout her 24-year career, Barnett had built a reputation as a diligent and fair-minded prosecutor, according to both her colleagues and the attorneys who had opposed her in court. She had handled over 70 murder trials, including the high-profile capital murder case of Suzanne Basso, who was executed for luring a mentally disabled man to Texas with the promise of marriage and then killing him. Barnett knew that Sandra's case was tough. There was no clear motive, no confession, and no direct evidence linking Sandra to the crime. Despite the challenges, Barnett was convinced of Sandra's guilt. During the 13-day trial that began in August 2017, Barnett presented Sandra as a cold-blooded killer who carefully planned Jamie's murder, luring him into their bedroom with the promise of sex. Barnett told the jury that Sandra had used a gray telephone cord to tie Jamie's feet, then fatally stabbed him from chest to neck. The prosecutor highlighted the discovery of a bag of sex toys on the bed, which Sandra later claimed was a joke gift from a friend. Although Barnett couldn't exactly say why Sandra did it, she offered several possible motives, including Jamie's life insurance policy with HISD and Sandra's alleged desire to end their marriage. However, as a Jehovah's Witness, Sandra's religion did not allow divorce. Sandra's attorney, George Ma Sechrist, a well-established and respected legal expert, presented a contrasting image of the seemingly fragile woman sitting at the defense table. According to Sechrist, Sandra was a victim of investigators who had jumped to conclusions, forming a theory within 2 hours of arriving at the crime scene. He backed this claim by pointing out that they had initially attempted to file murder charges while the crime scene investigators were still processing her home. Seacrest emphasized the lack of physical evidence linking Sandra to the crime, highlighting the fact that her blood was not found at the scene and that she had no cuts on her hands. He offered an alternative explanation. Sandra had been the victim of a home invasion, during which she suffered a head injury and was bound in her closet while the intruders killed her husband. For the jurors watching Barnett and Seacrest in the courtroom, the atmosphere was likened to a high-stakes boxing match, as the two lawyers clashed in a battle of wits. Barnett landed a significant blow with the help of Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter expert and crime scene reconstructionist from the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Rossi testified that the evidence at the crime scene contradicted the idea of a home invasion. She highlighted several key points, including the absence of signs of forced entry, the untouched dresser drawers in the bedroom, and a lit candle on Jamie's nightstand, which suggested that no struggle had occurred near the closet where Jamie died. Rossi explained that most of the blood was confined to the closet, with a few exceptions, such as spatter on the back of a chair, the white medical stool, and tiny droplets on the comforter. According to Rossi, this spatter was likely caused by the injury to the artery near Jamie's thumb. Rossi concurred with the medical examiner's report, stating that all of Jamie's wounds were defensive in nature. She also noted that Jamie's loaded handgun was inches from his body in the closet, untouched. Rossi emphasized that in a situation like this, one's instinct is to try to disarm their attacker rather than shoot them, even if they are approaching with a knife. After 8 hours of deliberation spanning several days, the jury, comprising 8 men and 4 women, reached a guilty verdict for Sandra on the charge of murder, sentencing her to 27 years in prison. Although this sentence was shorter than the maximum possible 99 years, it was still a significant sentence. In explaining their decision, the jury foreman later stated that by the time Sandra would be released, she would be in her early 70s and might have the opportunity to see her grandchildren, adding that they considered this decision humane as they did not view Sandra as a threat to society. When District Judge Kelly Johnson announced the verdict, Sandra let out a loud shriek and nearly collapsed into her chair. The courtroom, filled with supporters who had been convinced that the trial was merely a formality to prove Sandra's innocence, was left in stunned disbelief. Despite attempts to reassure Sandra that everything would turn out fine, perhaps to boost their own morale, the reality of the situation suddenly became clear, and everything fell apart. Sandra, clad in a red blazer and relying on a cane, was escorted out of the courtroom, where she paused to share a final emotional hug with Liz. Once they released each other, Liz crumpled to the floor, overwhelmed by grief. Having lost both her father and mother to a justice system she felt had failed them catastrophically, Liz was left feeling utterly alone and devastated. The jury foreman staunchly defended the prosecution's case, arguing it was the most plausible explanation, despite being rooted in speculation and theory. He highlighted the discrepancies in Sandra's account and questioned the legitimacy of her alleged seizure that night. While he conceded it was possible the jury had erred, he ultimately stood by their verdict. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Heidi Firkus. Heidi Marie Firkus was born on December 14, 1984, to John and Alinda Erickson, and was the youngest of their 3 children and their only daughter. Throughout her life, she lived to the fullest. Known for her playful and artistic personality, Heidi graduated from high school in 2003 and went on to study at the University of Northwestern in Roseville. In addition to her studies, she regularly attended Calvary Church in the city, a place she had been a part of since her early years. At Calvary Church, Heidi met Nicholas Firkus, nicknamed Nick, and together they led the youth group, serving the community with dedication and passion. Born on February 25, 1983, to Julie and Steve Firkus, Nick was a driven and ambitious young man. He worked as the director of operations at a reputable carpet cleaning company, known for his well-rounded personality and strong work ethic. In 2007, when they were 22 and 20 years old respectively, they decided to take their relationship to the next level. Surrounded by loved ones and in the same church where they first met, they exchanged vows, sealing their commitment to each other. To those around them, Nick and Heidi's marriage seemed perfect. They shared a passion for travel and biking, often enjoying these activities together. As active members of their church community, they also loved hosting dinner parties for friends and family. Heidi had just started an administrative job at a financial services firm where her father worked. At the time, her relationship with Nick seemed strong and promising, with the two of them growing closer every day. But what nobody knew was that behind the closed doors of their home, a very different story was playing out. On the morning of April 25, 2010, Heidi's life was about to take a devastating turn. She called 911 from her home in St. Paul, Minnesota, to report a break-in. Just 38 seconds into the call, while giving her address, she suddenly yelled, "No," and a gunshot was heard. About a minute later, Nick Furcus used Heidi's phone to call the dispatcher back. Panicked, he told them that someone had just broken into his house and shot him and his wife. Overcome with emotion, Nick sobbed uncontrollably, repeatedly saying that his wife Heidi was dead and pleaded with them to hurry. When the police arrived, they found Heidi unresponsive on the kitchen floor with a gunshot wound to her back. Nick was lying beside her, still on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, extremely upset and having been shot in the upper left leg. According to Nick, one or two intruders had broken into their home, prompting him to grab his shotgun in an attempt to escape with his wife through the back door. As they ran towards the detached garage, the intruder managed to wrestle the shotgun away from him and then shot both Nick and Heidi. Unfortunately, Heidi was pronounced dead at the scene, her life tragically cut short. Nick, on the other hand, was quickly rushed to the hospital for treatment and later questioned by the police. The police asked Nick why he and Heidi had left the safety of their bedroom to face potential danger. Nick explained that they were simply trying to escape the house through the back door. Nick's injuries were treated at the hospital, and he was released just 3 hours later. The police then interviewed him again at the station about the incident. During the police station interview, Nick provided a detailed account of what had happened. He recalled watching a movie with Heidi and having a glass of wine before going to bed around midnight. Nick said he woke up between 6:10 and 6:15 a.m. when he heard the screen door open and someone fiddling with the doorknob. The investigators questioned Nick about locking the deadbolt, and he admitted that although he and Heidi usually made sure to lock it, he believed he had forgotten to do so that night. After hearing the noises, Nick retrieved his shotgun from the upstairs closet. He explained that he had brought it upstairs from the basement a month prior because he had noticed it was rusting. Nick mentioned that the shotgun was initially empty, but he loaded it after hearing the noises. Next, he woke up Heidi, asked her to call 911, and instructed her to leave the house and go to the garage where their cars were parked. Nick also shared that he and Heidi had a pre-planned safety strategy in case of trouble, which involved going to the garage where their cars were parked. Nick, who is right-handed, was walking behind Heidi towards the garage, holding a pair of jeans in his right hand and the shotgun in his left hand. As they paused next to the front door, Nick got Heidi's wallet from the table. That's when the door suddenly burst open. A tall, dark-skinned man, around 6'1" and 200 to 220 pounds, rushed in. He wore a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood tight around his face. Nick dropped the jeans as the intruder grabbed the shotgun barrel. The two men started fighting physically. During the struggle, the gun fired, and Nick said his finger accidentally slid onto the trigger as Heidi ran away, hitting her in the back. The shot made Heidi collapse immediately. Nick and the suspect continued fighting over the shotgun until it fired again, hitting Nick in the upper thigh and making him fall. That's when the intruder escaped out the front door. Nick told investigators that his house was scheduled to be foreclosed the next day, and they had planned to tell their parents and friends about their situation that same day. Nick explained that he and Heidi had fallen behind on their bills, and their house had already been foreclosed on and sold to someone else. As a result, they were required to vacate the premises, but they hadn't shared this information with their friends or family. Their plan was to pack up their belongings on Sunday and Monday morning, leaving some items in the garage to collect later and find someone to stay with temporarily. The police released a description of the suspected intruder based on Nick's account. The individual is a male, between 6'0" and 6'2" tall, and weighs around 200 to 220 pounds. He was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt. Later, about 3 weeks after the initial report, the police provided an updated sketch made by an artist hired by Nick's lawyer. This updated description included more details. The suspected intruder is an African-American male, estimated to be between 40 and 60 years old. During the initial investigation into Heidi's death, the police focused on finding an unidentified African-American male intruder, as described by Nick. The area was thoroughly searched for evidence and witnesses to support Nick's account. However, the investigation yielded no arrests or charges, leaving the case unsolved for many years. Over a decade had passed without any resolution to Heidi's murder. Nick had seemingly moved on, marrying Rachel and starting a family. Nevertheless, financial troubles resurfaced, prompting Rachel's suspicions about undisclosed problems. Her concerns about their financial situation and Nick's reluctance to discuss it sparked her curiosity. Rachel began to dig deeper, uncovering secrets and inconsistencies in Nick's past. Her discoveries led her to question everything she thought she knew about her husband and his possible involvement in Heidi's tragic death. Rachel was unaware of the financial difficulties that the couple was experiencing, similar to the struggles that Heidi and Nick had faced in the past. Her concerns prompted her to contact the authorities, which led to renewed interest in the case. Investigators looked into Nick's second wife, Rachel Firkus, whom he married in 2012. When Rachel spoke to the authorities, she had already divorced Nick due to his worsening financial problems. Prior to their divorce in 2019, Rachel had recorded a conversation where she confronted Nick about his deception. She told investigators that Nick was repeating the same behaviors he had exhibited with Heidi, citing a letter that showed they had not paid their property taxes and were at risk of eviction. After Rachel contacted the police in 2020, a series of events unfolded that again brought the Heidi Firkus murder case into focus. Sergeant Nicole Sipes, who was assigned to the case, carefully listened to Rachel's concerns and began re-examining the evidence. Sergeant Sipes of the St. Paul Police Department became deeply committed to uncovering the truth behind Heidi's murder. She took the initiative to ask for the FBI's assistance in analyzing the audio recordings from the 911 call, hoping to find clues that could shed light on what occurred on the night of the murder. After a thorough analysis of the audio, the FBI concluded that there was no evidence of a third person being present during the incident, which contradicted the initial statement of Heidi's husband to the police. This new development left Sergeant Sipes and her team perplexed. If Heidi and her husband were indeed the only people in the house, then what exactly transpired between them that led to her tragic death? The absence of a third person only served to heighten suspicions about the husband's potential role in the crime. With renewed determination, the investigation pressed on with greater intensity. The FBI's findings had unveiled a fresh avenue of inquiry, and Sergeant Sipes was more resolute than ever in her pursuit of justice for Heidi and in providing answers to her bereaved family. The investigators obtained financial documents that contradicted Nicholas Firkus's previous statements, further implicating him in Heidi's murder. They noticed Nick's account of the events kept changing. Initially, he claimed he got his gun but the intruder took it from him and shot both him and Heidi. Later, he said the intruder didn't take the gun, and his own finger accidentally pulled the trigger, hitting Heidi in the back. Despite thorough investigation, there was an evident lack of signs of a struggle, such as overturned furniture or marks on the walls, at the crime scene. The forensic analysis of the scene contradicted Nick's account, particularly the trajectory of the shot that struck Heidi. Additionally, Heidi's 911 call made no mention of an intruder. The absence of evidence of a break-in or intruder at the crime scene raised the investigators' suspicions. They believed the lack of clues was part of Nick's plan to cover up his involvement in Heidi's death. On May 19, 2021, a decade after Heidi's death, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Nick Firkus. A SWAT team subsequently arrived at his home in Mounds View, where they took him into custody. The arrest was a direct result of Rachel's persistent suspicions and the tireless efforts of Police Sergeant Nicole Sipes. The sudden development came as a shock to many who had assumed the case had stalled and would never be resolved. As the legal proceedings progressed, the details of the case were re-examined, and the truth about that fateful night slowly began to emerge. The burning question on everyone's mind was whether Nick would be held accountable for Heidi's tragic death. Following Heidi's family's statement in response to Nicholas's arrest, they expressed their gratitude to all those who had worked tirelessly to bring the case to this point. They also thanked everyone who had prayed and supported them throughout the years. Although they knew they could never have Heidi back, they believed that Heidi would have wanted them to uncover the truth, as God is honored by truth, and Heidi's life and memory are further honored by truth. When the case went to trial, Nick Firkus pleaded not guilty, maintaining his innocence. Most of his family, especially his father, believed in his innocence, arguing that Nick's deep love for Heidi would have prevented him from committing such a violent act. However, the jury disagreed. On February 10, 2023, the unthinkable happened. Nick, the person Heidi trusted most, was convicted of her brutal murder. After deliberating over the evidence for 10 hours, the jury delivered their verdict, leaving all who knew Heidi in shock and disbelief. In the trial, the prosecution built a strong case by presenting a timeline that revealed a man struggling with severe financial difficulties. They claimed that Nick had concealed the true extent of their financial struggles from Heidi, and fearing shame and conflict, he took drastic measures to end her life. The prosecution also questioned Nick's story of a home invasion, implying it was a ruse to shift attention away from himself. The prosecution presented strong evidence, including the lack of signs of forced entry and inconsistencies in Nick's account, which raised significant doubts about his version of events. Most convincingly, they highlighted the striking absence of DNA evidence or physical proof of a third party's presence, specifically the alleged intruder. This significant omission seriously undermines the credibility of Nick's story. Prosecutor Rachel Craker alleged that Nick Firkus refused to accept the truth about his deception, which led him to commit a shocking act. According to Firkus, he took Heidi's life to save his reputation. However, his defense attorney, Robert Richmond, argued that the transition from financial distress to murder was illogical. Richmond pointed out that killing his wife would not save his reputation, making no sense. After intense debates during the trial, the jury began deliberating on Nick's fate. The verdict would determine whether justice would be served for Heidi's tragic death. The jury carefully considered the evidence, emotional testimonies, and legal arguments before reaching a unanimous decision. Nick Firkus was guilty of first-degree murder. On April 13, 2023, the judge sentenced Nick to life without the possibility of parole, the harshest possible punishment. Nicholas Firkus maintains his innocence despite being convicted of a crime in a court of law. He persists in denying involvement in the death of his wife Heidi, even after being sentenced. At his sentencing, Nicholas Firkus acknowledged the harm caused, saying that he understood the pain and loss felt by everyone present. He noted that while justice had been served, it had come at a great cost: a shattered family, a betrayed community, and a life taken too soon. He expressed that the finality of it all was almost unbearable. The verdict finally brought Heidi's family and friends a sense of closure, but it also forced them to confront the painful truth that the person they thought they knew was capable of committing a heinous crime. Nick is currently serving a life sentence at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Despite the verdict, the main motive behind Heidi's killing remains unclear, leaving many questions unanswered about what drove Nick to commit such a tragic act. However, investigators did uncover some clues that may have contributed to his actions. In June 2009, Nick received foreclosure papers on their house, which was subsequently sold at a sheriff's auction that same month. This was about 10 months before Heidi's death. Then, in February 2010, eviction proceedings began, with a hearing scheduled for March 8, 2010, which Nick attended alone. The original lockout date was set for April 9, 2010. However, Nick made a successful bid to delay the lockout by calling the attorneys, claiming his grandmother was in the hospital and about to die. He asked to reschedule the lockout for April 26, 2010. But when investigators looked into this, they found no evidence to support Nick's claim that either of his grandmothers was hospitalized or had died in 2010. When investigators asked Nick if Heidi knew about their financial difficulties, he claimed that she was fully aware of their situation and that they had even made plans to move to a new place and start over. However, the truth was later revealed. Nick had hidden their financial struggles from Heidi, and tragically, he took her life before she could discover the harsh reality. In reality, Nick was too ashamed to tell Heidi about their money problems, which included $118,000 in credit card debt and 22 months of late mortgage payments. Prosecutors argued that Nick killed Heidi because he was too ashamed and afraid to face the reality of their situation. By ending her life, he saved himself from having to confront the consequences of his own deception. Although justice was served, the pain and loss felt by Heidi's loved ones remained. No amount of legal punishment could undo the harm done or bring back the vibrant life that was so cruelly taken. It was unthinkable that the person Heidi trusted most, her own husband, would be the one to take her life. But that is exactly what happened in her tragic case. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shauna Nelson. Heather Hodges and Ignacio Gose met at a university party while studying at the University of Northern Colorado. It was instant attraction, with Ignacio's friendly nature and great personality drawing Heather in right away. They both felt an undeniable spark of love at first sight. Heather had a lively and fun personality combined with a touch of innocence. Her stunning physical appearance didn't go unnoticed, with her pale skin, red lips, and dark hair captivating Ignacio. He affectionately nicknamed her his Snow White. When Ignacio asked Heather out on their first date, she was thrilled and eagerly shared the news with her roommates, who were over the moon for her. Heather's friends were delighted for her, as she hadn't had much experience with dating, and they believed this date could be the start of something truly special. As Heather and Ignacio's relationship blossomed, it quickly evolved into a more serious commitment. Ignacio was devoted, constantly surprising Heather with her favorite flowers and coffee. His thoughtful gestures made Heather feel loved, appreciated, and valued. After graduating from the University of Northern Colorado, Ignacio took their relationship to the next level by proposing to Heather, and she happily accepted his proposal. Heather and Ignacio got engaged, but Heather made it clear that if Ignacio ever cheated on her, she would end the marriage immediately, no matter how sorry he was or how hard he tried to make things right. This was non-negotiable for her, and she would not tolerate infidelity in their relationship. A year after getting engaged, they got married in a beautiful ceremony. Ignacio became a police officer at the Gray, Colorado Police Department, while Heather worked as a supervisor at the local credit union. Her coworkers and customers loved her because she was so good at comforting people during tough times. One of her colleagues even said she was wonderful in every way. 5 years after getting married, Heather and Ignacio decided to start a family. Soon, Heather gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Victoria. Being a mom filled Heather with joy, and her whole world revolved around her new daughter. Ignacio was a great dad too. From the outside, it seemed like they had the perfect life. Heather's father died of a heart attack in 1997, and soon after, her mother was diagnosed with cancer, which was even more devastating. To care for her mother, Heather dedicated herself to providing support and care for several years until her mother's passing in 2003. During this time, Ignacio was a loving and supportive husband and father, taking on more responsibilities to care for their daughter Victoria and help with household chores. However, after months of supporting Heather through her grief, Ignacio began to develop feelings for his coworker, Shauna Nelson, a dispatcher at the Gray Police Department, who was married to Ken, a deputy at the Wells County Sheriff's Office. Shauna's marriage was struggling, and she and Ignacio started as friends, but eventually developed a romantic relationship. They began flirting and teasing each other, and Shauna's compliments caught Ignacio's attention, captivating him. As they spent more time together, their connection deepened, and their feelings shifted from playful flirtation to intense passion and intimacy. Shauna and Ignacio's romantic relationship grew stronger, fueling local gossip, but Ignacio's wife Heather remained clueless about his infidelity. Despite everyone in their social circle being aware of the situation, no one dared to inform Heather. As a result, Shauna and Ignacio's affair continued to thrive, with Heather still unaware of her husband's deception. When Shauna discovered she was pregnant, she eagerly shared the news with Ignacio. However, he didn't take the news well and started questioning whether the baby was actually his son or Ken, who's Shauna's husband. Shauna assured him that Ken had undergone a vasectomy after their second child, ruling out the possibility of Ken being the father. Appreciating the dire consequences Heather would face if she found out about the pregnancy, Ignacio became anxious. He didn't want the baby and desperately sought a solution with Shauna's consent. He convinced her to terminate the pregnancy and drove her to the clinic. Months and years went by, with Heather still unaware of her husband's affair with Shauna. However, as time passed, Shauna grew impatient and decided to confront Heather. One day, she followed Heather to the grocery store, accompanied by her friend Michelle Moore. Shauna and Michelle discreetly followed Heather around the store, observing her every move. Heather, still oblivious to their presence, engaged in a phone conversation with a friend. Shauna confronted Heather in a store, insulting and accusing her in a vicious outburst. The verbal attack left Heather deeply disturbed. Recognizing Shauna from her husband Ignacio's work Christmas parties, Heather decided to talk to him about the incident, as she knew Shauna was his coworker at the police department. Heather asked Ignacio why Shauna, who had always been friendly, would suddenly lash out at her. Ignacio explained that Shauna had romantic feelings for him, but assured Heather she had nothing to worry about. He promised to tell Shauna to leave Heather alone, and he did confront her, but Shauna became furious with him. Despite this, Shauna continued to harass Heather. One time, Shauna showed up at Heather and Ignacio's home, demanding to see Ignacio. Heather couldn't shake the feeling that there might be more to her husband's relationship with Shauna than she knew. Shauna confided in a supervisor at the county dispatch center about her affair with Ignacio, revealing her deep feelings for him and stating that she loved him more than anyone else she had ever met. However, Shauna expressed frustration that Ignacio's wife, Heather, was an obstacle to their relationship. According to the supervisor, Shauna revealed that she would visit the shooting range to vent her frustrations, where she would imagine the targets were Heather. Although Shauna and Ignacio had been having an affair for years, Ken, Shauna's husband, remained unaware of the situation until he stumbled upon Shauna's journal, which detailed her relationship with Ignacio. Despite his discovery, Ken chose not to leave Shauna, opting instead to stay together for the sake of their children. Ignacio was involved with multiple women, including Shauna, who was aware of his relationship with another woman. This knowledge drove Shauna to be possessive and controlling, determined to remain the primary woman in his life. She blackmailingly threatened to reveal everything to Heather if he ever considered leaving her. Shauna's fixation on Ignacio intensified, and in July 2005, she took a drastic step to cement her position in his life by getting a tattoo of his family name on her leg. Shauna's fixation on Ignacio had become unhealthy and eventually turned into stalking. Whenever Ignacio went to a restaurant with his partner Heather and their daughter Victoria, Shauna would deliberately show up with her own family. Ignacio found Shauna's behavior increasingly disturbing, yet he continued his affair with her despite this. Shauna discovered she was pregnant with Ignacio's baby for the second time. She informed him that she had no intention of terminating the pregnancy, as she wanted to keep the baby. In March 2006, Shauna gave birth to a son, Christian, who was fathered by Ignacio. At the time, Shauna was still married to Ken, and Ignacio's wife, Heather, was unaware that he had a child with his coworker. In the summer of 2006, Ken offered to raise Christian as his own, on the condition that Shauna would remain married to him, and she accepted this proposal. Heather was blindsided when a woman approached her with devastating news. Shauna Nelson had given birth to Oso's baby. This revelation left Heather stunned and confused. When she returned home, she confronted Ignacio about the child, demanding the truth. However, Ignacio lied to her, covering up his affair with Shauna, and Heather chose to believe him. In December 2006, Heather discovered Ignacio was missing one night. When he finally returned, she confronted him again. This time, Ignacio decided to come clean, revealing he had been with Shauna that night and confessing to a long-term affair. He also disclosed that Shauna had been pregnant twice, resulting in the recent birth of his son. After Ignacio's confession, Heather followed through on her threat to end their relationship if he cheated. She kicked him out of the house, but her strong desire to keep her family together led her to reconsider and call him back the next day. Despite her initial anger and disbelief, Heather didn't want to break up the family and feared the impact on their daughter Victoria. Heather told Ignacio she knew he was in love with her and that she felt the same way. She said she wanted to keep their marriage together and didn't plan to file for divorce. However, she made it clear she wasn't ready to just go back to how things were right away. Instead, she gave him some conditions to meet before she'd consider taking him back. First, Ignacio had to get tested for STDs. Heather also suggested he see a counselor, thinking it would help them work through the tough parts of fixing their marriage and dealing with the underlying issues that led to him cheating. Additionally, Heather asked Ignacio to give up his rights as a father to Shauna's baby. And lastly, she wanted him to end things with Shauna altogether. Ignacio was desperate to save his marriage and agreed to all of Heather's conditions. He knew he'd hurt her and was willing to make things right. Ignacio called Shauna to break the news, with Heather standing nearby and listening to the whole conversation. Moments after Ignacio ended their phone call, Heather received a text message on her cell phone. The message included a photo of Shauna and Ignacio's son, accompanied by the words, "IGS Flesh and Blood." Shauna was enraged, still seething from Ignacio's decision to end their relationship and stay with Heather. Feeling betrayed and abandoned, her anger intensified. As a result, Shauna started openly discussing her plans to sue Ignacio for child support, seeking financial compensation for their son, Christian. By early 2007, Ignacio and Heather were working to salvage their marriage, which had been damaged by Ignacio's infidelity. Despite the obstacles, they were committed to repairing their relationship and moving forward. However, Shauna, Ignacio's former mistress, refused to let go and continued to torment Heather. The situation became so unbearable that Ignacio and Heather had to take extreme precautions to safeguard their family and property. They started parking Heather's car in the garage rather than on the street to prevent Shauna from vandalizing it. Moreover, they sought legal help and had their lawyer serve Shauna with a formal warning, instructing her to leave Ignacio, Heather, and their daughter Victoria alone. The warning explicitly stated that she must stop harassing and intimidating them. Shauna ignored the warnings and consequences, continuing to harass Heather through various methods, including text messages, emails, and voicemails, using abusive and hurtful language. On January 23, 2007, at around 6 p.m., Heather was leaving her job at the credit union, looking forward to spending the evening at home with her daughter. But her peaceful night was abruptly shattered as she exited the building with her colleagues. In the dimly lit parking lot, where they were preparing to leave in their vehicles, the group was suddenly confronted by an individual dressed in black, wearing a Halloween mask and wielding a gun. The gunman deliberately targeted Heather, while others in the group tried to hide. He pointed his weapon at her head and ordered her to kneel. Before pulling the trigger, he told her, "You ruined my life," and then shot her twice in the head at point-blank range in an execution-style killing. The gunman fled the scene in a nearby red pickup truck. As Heather lay dying, her co-workers and other witnesses in the parking lot called 911. Paramedics rushed to the scene but were unable to save her life. The gunshot wounds to her head proved fatal, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. When the police arrived to secure the crime scene, they realized the victim was Heather, the wife of their co-worker Oso. They contacted Ignacio, telling him to rush to the hospital. Ignacio rushed through the hospital corridors to reach Heather's trauma room, but a doctor intercepted him with devastating news. It was too late, and Heather had already passed away. The news about his wife's death hit Ignacio hard. He knew he had to break the devastating news to their 9-year-old daughter, Victoria. Telling Victoria that her mother was gone was the most difficult thing Ignacio ever had to do. He and Victoria spent a long time sitting together, hugging and crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, witnesses were sharing their accounts of the murder with the police. One witness reported seeing the shooter suddenly appear and then quickly disappear in a red pickup truck. Another witness thought the shooter might have been a woman based on the way they ran. During the investigation, the police focused on a suspect named Shauna Nelson, who had been mentioned in connection with Heather's harassment. Someone who knew about Oso's affair suggested that Shauna might have been responsible for Heather's shooting. The police officers at the crime scene were already familiar with Shauna, as she was a police dispatcher, and her husband, Ken, who was also a police officer. They also knew that Ken owned a car similar to the one the shooter was driving. With the evidence against Shauna growing, the police put out an all-points bulletin on the radio, looking for her in the red pickup truck they believed she was driving. That night, Shauna's husband, Ken Nelson, was on patrol in his police car when he heard the alert about his wife and her vehicle. He immediately started searching for her and found her driving his car near their home within 20 minutes. When Ken stopped her, Shauna claimed she had been running errands, but Ken became suspicious because she was not wearing shoes, despite it being January in Colorado. What really caught his attention, however, was that she was wearing his socks, underwear, and pants. After stopping her, Ken called in the sighting and asked for backup. Soon, police officers arrived and took Shauna into custody. The investigation into Heather's murder began to focus on whether Shauna was involved. The authorities found a pair of shoes with Shauna's DNA on them, less than 1,000 feet from the crime scene. Moreover, they recovered 2 shell casings from a .40 caliber Glock Model 22, the same type of gun used by Ken in his work. This discovery further strengthened the case against Shauna. The investigators discovered a Halloween mask, similar to the one worn by the suspect in Heather's shooting, hidden under the seat of Ken's red pickup truck. A fully drawn bathtub was found at Shauna's home during a search, leading some to suspect that she may have been planning to clean herself of any blood spatter after the shooting. After her arrest, Shauna underwent thorough testing, including swabbing her clothing and hands for gunshot residue. The test results were positive, leading to her being charged with first-degree murder, although the shell casings matched the weapon used to kill Heather. Heather's husband, Ken Nelson, handed over his service weapon to his supervisor, but the actual gun used in the murder was never found. Because Ken didn't detain Shauna after the murder, he was charged with tampering with evidence and being an accessory to first-degree murder. During her interrogation, Shauna claimed that she had gone out to run errands and had worn her husband Ken's clothes from the laundry basket, which explained why she was dressed in his clothing. When questioned about Heather's murder, Shauna denied having any knowledge of or involvement in the crime. Another situation, Ignacio, was also extensively questioned, but was cleared of all suspicion in February 2008. Shauna's trial for the murder of Heather Gauss began, with Shauna pleading not guilty. The prosecution argued that Ignacio was not the first married officer with whom Shauna had an affair, and that her obsession with Ignacio was the motive behind Heather's murder. The prosecution made a deal with Shauna's former best friend, Michelle Moore, who had often accompanied Shauna when she publicly taunted Heather Garris. Michelle agreed to testify against Shauna in exchange for a reduced sentence, and she revealed how much Shauna hated Heather Gauss, even admitting to having helped plan her murder. During the trial, Shauna testified in her own defense, denying all accusations against her. She vigorously denied ever telling anyone that she fantasized about killing Heather Gauss or imagined her during target practice. She also denied any involvement in Heather's actual murder, claiming she was on her way to a liquor store at the time of the shooting. Shauna proposed an alternative theory, suggesting that her best friend Michelle was obsessed with her and wanted to make her happy by getting rid of Heather. However, when Michelle took the stand as a witness, she contradicted Shauna's claims under cross-examination. The prosecution alleged that Shauna wore her husband's clothing during the shooting to frame him for the murder. According to the prosecution, the goal was to eliminate Heather, Oso's wife, and Ken, Shauna's husband, so that Shauna and Ignacio could live together freely. After deliberating for 5 hours, the jury returned a verdict, finding Shauna and Nelson guilty of first-degree murder. The judge addressed Shauna, stating that she deserved every day of her sentence. Michelle Moore, Shauna's former best friend, received a 9-year prison sentence for her role in planning Heather's murder after testifying against Shauna. Following Shauna's murder conviction, Ken Nelson resigned from the police department, filed for divorce, and moved out of state with his children, including Shauna's son Christian, whose father is Ignacio. However, Ken later returned to Colorado, hoping that one day the children would be allowed to visit Shauna in prison, despite the circumstances. Ken remained convinced that Shauna was a loving and great mother, regardless of her actions. The charges against Ken were eventually dropped. Heather's loved ones are relieved that Shauna is behind bars, believing that justice has been served. They hope Shauna will reflect on the suffering she caused Heather and her family every day for the rest of her life. Shauna's selfish actions led to Heather's death, depriving her daughter Victoria of her mother. Tragically, Victoria died in a car accident in 2015 at the age of 17, losing control of her vehicle and striking it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Amber Rose. At the break of dawn, Lisa Ann, the dedicated mother, walked into her daughter Amber Rose's bedroom. To her surprise, Amber Rose appeared to be in a deep slumber, her face nestled under a pillow. Lisa gently nudged her, anticipating the usual sleepy protest, but instead, there was only silence. A peculiar dark stain on the pillow caught Lisa's eye, stark against the pristine fabric. With worry creeping in, she attributed it to a nosebleed, a sense of foreboding settling in her heart. Lisa raised the pillow, only to be confronted with a sight that would haunt her forever. Amber Rose lay motionless, a scene as shocking as it was unexpected. With a gaping wound on her neck, it was clear this was no ordinary nosebleed, but a heartbreaking nightmare turned reality. Lisa's agonized cry shattered the morning calm, tearing through the once serene household. Brendan McNee, Lisa's partner, raced in, his heart pounding in his chest. The sight of Amber Rose, so tranquil and pale, shook him to his very core. He reached for a pulse, confirming his worst dread. In the ensuing chaos, Jaylen, Amber Rose's brother, phoned for an ambulance, plunging the peaceful morning into a terrifying ordeal. Amber Rose, a lively 16-year-old with aspirations and dreams, worked diligently at a local supermarket, saving every penny for her first car. Her dream was to become a dedicated police dog handler, a testament to her love for animals and her eagerness to serve her community. She had a profound love for art and the beach, often dedicating her free time to sketching the breathtaking landscapes of New Zealand. Amber Rose had faced adversity, leaving school a year earlier due to cyberbullying, but she had made peace with her tormentors. She was embracing life, her mother often remarked. The investigation into Amber Rose's tragic death led the authorities to her family's residence. Interviews with her relatives and her boyfriend marked the beginning. Jaylen, Amber Rose's brother, recollected returning from work with his girlfriend around 12:15 a.m. The key was still in the lock and the kitchen lights were on. Assuming that his sister had left them on, he knocked on her door. Hearing no answer, he assumed she was asleep and retired to his room to indulge in video games, oblivious to the unfolding tragedy next door. Amber Rose's boyfriend, Kristen Clark, had been in contact with her on the fateful night. She had shared screenshots of a heated exchange with a 30-year-old doctor named Vinod Skantha. Concerned, Clark offered to pick her up, but Amber Rose declined. This refusal would be their final communication. Restless, Clark went to her house, tapped on her window in the early hours of February 3rd, and, receiving no response, messaged her once more. Amber Rose's sister, Chantel Rush, received a message from Amber Rose on the night of her passing, expressing anger. Chantel only saw the message the following morning and inquired, but no reply came. Amber Rose had already departed. An autopsy performed by pathologist Dr. Kate White unveiled the harrowing details of Amber Rose's final moments. She had suffered multiple wounds to her neck and throat, the most severe being a 110mm gash on the left side of her neck. The injury had severed vital structures, including the carotid artery and other blood vessels, nearly severing the windpipe. It had also penetrated deeply enough to mark the vertebrae, split her left ear, and extend beyond the base of her skull. This fatal wound, estimated to be 5 to 6 centimeters deep at its maximum, resulted in Amber Rose's tragic demise due to severe blood loss. The assault had caused other injuries, including 2 stab wounds to the back of her neck. Most of the injuries were minor and would not have caused death, but the fatal wound suggested that the perpetrator had knowledge of what they were doing, indicating a deliberate act of violence. The autopsy report revealed chilling details about Amber Rose's last moments, causing shock among the community. The key questions that remained were why someone would want to kill Amber Rose in such a brutal way, and who was the man she was arguing with. The man in question was Dr. Vinod Skantha. A 30-year-old Amber Rose had met Skantha in mid-2017 through mutual friends when she was just 15 years old. Skantha was known to exclusively hang out with teenagers, often hosting parties at his house in Dunedin, where he provided alcohol and sometimes drugs to the teenage guests. Amber Rose had even discussed moving in with Skantha with her sister Chantel Rush. Chantel had questioned her sister about Skantha's intentions, finding it extremely odd that a 30-plus-year-old man would want teenagers moving in with him. But Amber Rose was not concerned. She saw Skantha as a father figure and was excited about the prospect of living with a doctor. She had even used Skantha's credit card to make an online purchase, brushing it off as just a few dollars that he wouldn't even notice. Chantel, however, was worried. In a later conversation, Amber Rose mentioned planning to go to Scantha's house with her mother to try to get money out of him, or she would go to the cops. Was she blackmailing him for money? As the police dug deeper into Scantha, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Scantha was a graduate of the University of Auckland Medical School and was working as a junior doctor at Dunedin Hospital at the time. However, his behavior had been deteriorating throughout 2017 as his alcohol consumption increased. He had even turned up to work intoxicated and treated a patient while under the influence. He had narrowly avoided being fired for poor performance in July 2017 by lying to his supervisors that his mother had died. Scantha's increasingly unpredictable behavior had led him into conflict with his friends. One friend, Connor, ended up in a fight with Scantha over how he was treating some women friends. Another friend was so angered by Scantha's derogatory comments about some women that he smashed Scantha's BMW wing mirror with a hammer. Amber Rose's conflict with Scantha began in January 2018 after a party at Scantha's home. Amber Rose woke up to find Scantha's hand down her pants and her top and bra removed. She felt she had been drugged, a chilling realization that marked the beginning of a horrifying ordeal. The evening of Amber Rose's murder was a night filled with intense emotions: rage, dread, and brutality. The confrontation between Amber Rose and Scantha ignited when Scantha accused her of misusing his credit card. In a retaliatory move, Amber Rose exposed an incident from January 2018, alleging that Scantha had assaulted her and menacing to reveal his actions to the authorities and his workplace. She took to Instagram at 11 p.m., sharing excerpts of Facebook chats with Scantha, where she accused him of arriving drunk at work, providing alcohol to minors, and engaging in inappropriate behavior with them. She urged him to grow up and made it clear that she would expose his deeds to the public. Messages highlighted his offers of money in exchange for sexual acts with her and other young individuals, stressing her intention to report him to the proper authorities. Despite Scantha's pleas to delete the post, Amber Rose stood firm. The conversation concluded at 11:25 p.m., with Amber Rose expressing her wishes for his conscience to trouble him and for guilt to haunt his nights. At 11:39 p.m., he phoned a friend in the presence of other teenagers, arranging a pickup. Surveillance footage captured Scantha's silver BMW heading towards Glen in Dunedin, where his friend awaited. The car reappeared on camera after the pickup, with the friend later describing Scantha as seemingly composed, lacking any signs of apprehension. Guided by the friend, Scantha drove to Amber Rose's residence, sketching out the house's layout on the car's dashboard. The friend disclosed the location of a spare house key hidden beneath a Buddha statue near the entrance. His narrative shifted during police interrogations and his subsequent testimony over a span of 3 days on the stand. Cloaked in dark attire and gloves, Scantha employed the spare key to gain entry into Amber Rose's home on Clariston Avenue. Making his way to her bedroom, he launched a vicious attack with a kitchen knife from his residence, fatally injuring her by severing her carotid artery and inflicting damage to her spine and windpipe in a single, lethal strike. Numerous other wounds were inflicted on her neck and throat. Upon exiting the residence, Scantha carried Amber Rose's phone, identification, and a blood-stained knife. Time was running out. Amber Rose's boyfriend, Kristen Clark, had arrived post-midnight and attempted to make contact, receiving no reply. Around 12:10 a.m., Amber Rose's brother Jayden and his partner returned from work. Had Scantha lingered a bit longer, he would have been spotted by 3 witnesses. Scantha took Amber Rose's phone, fearing that the incriminating conversations about his behavior could still lead to his career being destroyed, but he accidentally activated its camera function just after midnight as he attempted to smash it on the street outside her home. He disposed of her phone in a swamp at Blackhead Quarry, hoping to delete the exchanges between the pair. But the phone was found, reconstructed, and its data recovered, including the images taken accidentally. The forensic evidence also implicated Scantha, who had claimed that it was his teenage friend driving the vehicle. Splatters of Amber Rose's blood were found on the passenger side of the vehicle, thought to have gotten there. When Scantha removed his glove, traces of blood were additionally detected on his footwear, within a bag storing his garments, and on the side of his car where a passenger would sit. While testifying, his associate disclosed that Scantha instructed him to clean his vehicle and personal items. Nevertheless, the cleaning task was executed inadequately, as forensic examiners identified the presence of DNA belonging to Amber Rose at all those locations, some of which displayed a combination of DNA profiles from both Scantha and Amber Rose. Experts in forensic science pointed out that the blood observed on Scantha's shoes and the car's window had an exceedingly remote likelihood of originating from Amber Rose. Moreover, Amber Rose's blood was detected in a bag containing the defendant's attire, although no trace of the defendant's DNA was found in Amber Rose's living quarters, likely due to the usage of gloves. On the 4th of February, accompanied by the same companion, Scantha visited Amber Rose's mother. He presented her with flowers and a card to convey sympathies while conversing about Amber Rose's demise, speculating whether it was a case of suicide or if another individual, such as her stepfather, might have been implicated. Unbeknownst to him, an undercover law enforcement officer was present during their discussion. Subsequently, when dropping off his companion, Scantha made threats of harm towards him and his family if he revealed any information. However, the companion promptly contacted the authorities and confessed everything. Coincidentally, Scantha injured his hand while handling a sword and had to seek medical attention, but law enforcement intercepted him prior to his arrival at the hospital. During interrogation, Scantha refuted having a close relationship with Amber Rose, asserting that he solely acquainted her mother. He portrayed Amber Rose as merely a friend and narrated visiting her mother out of compassion upon learning of her demise. When questioned about the circumstances of Amber Rose's passing, he simulated ignorance and played down their prior interactions, citing a fallout due to her inebriated state and unfounded accusations against him on social media. He argued that she was too young for him, and he claimed he wasn't creepy because he wouldn't spend so much time with a 16-year-old. The detective informed him that they had gathered cell phone data and other evidence to track his movements on the night of the incident. Scantha then explained where he was the night Amber Rose died, but his explanation lacked clarity and detail. He mentioned remembering visiting the beach with a teenage friend, the same friend who had called the police and confessed everything. About 30 minutes into the interview, Scantha began interrogating the detective and asserting it was preposterous to suggest he would harm Amber Rose over silly Instagram posts. He claimed he wouldn't jeopardize his whole career and urged the detective to really think about this. Scantha then made another attempt, pointing the finger at his teenage friend, claiming his friend must have committed the crime and set him up. He continued to deny all involvement and told the detective he wouldn't be speaking anymore. Scantha was promptly arrested. Meanwhile, Lisa Ann was completely devastated by the loss of her daughter. People close to her said the crime had stolen her soul. She could not bear the pain and grief, and she committed suicide on 11th of June 2018, 4 months after Amber's death, compounding the tragedy that deeply affected an otherwise peaceful town. Skipping forward to the trial on November 4, 2019, the prosecution presented key evidence that Scantha and his friend visited Blackhead Quarry, where Scantha threw Amber Rose's cell phone into the water. However, it was retrieved after police drained the waters and located the phone where his friend said it was thrown. During his trial, a key witness recounted a disturbing encounter Amber Rose had with Scantha at his residence. Initially, he proposed a transaction of $2,000 for sexual favors, which escalated to a staggering $20,000 upon her refusal. She slapped him hastily and made her exit. Scantha's unsettling infatuation with Miss Rush was described by friends as creepy. However, the horror doesn't end there. It was revealed that Scantha had a history of offering teenage girls money in exchange for sex. The courtroom was left in shock as another witness shared her horrifying experience with Scantha. One night in 2017, she woke up to find herself scantily clad, with Scantha violating her personal space. An older woman was also present on the bed. When Scantha proposed a threesome, the witness declined and promptly left. On the 26th of November 2019, Scantha was unanimously found guilty by the jury of murder and 4 counts of threatening to kill the prosecutor's witness and their family. His demeanor remained devoid of any remorse or emotion upon hearing the verdict. Consequently, he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 19 years. Fast forward to the 14th of April in the year 2021, the New Zealand Court of Appeal rejected Scantha's appeal and upheld his conviction. On that very day, Scantha tragically took his own life while in custody, although the specifics surrounding his passing remain undisclosed. Brendan McNee, the partner of Lisa Rush and stepfather of Amber Rose Rush, who fell victim to the heinous actions of former physician Vened Scantha, expressed his relief at the news of Scantha's demise in prison. In memory of Amber Rose Rush, her loved ones gathered for a funeral at the Hope and Sons Chapel in South Dunedin. In a touching tribute to the departed teenager, several family members immortalized Amber's bird and flower design through tattoos. Additionally, a Give a Little crowdfunding page was initiated, amassing a total of $845 by the 14th of February 2018. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you before. The story began on a Saturday evening in July 2011, during a dance lesson when Dr. Joseph Saunier, a respected and wealthy pathologist, first met Michelle Tina. A prominent figure in his city and beyond, Joseph was a single man enjoying freedom, status, money, and a life of distinction. Michelle was nearly 10 years his junior, successful in her own right, and living a life of pleasure. Their meeting on the dance floor marked the beginning of what would become a passionate romance, a relationship that tragically ended in tears. At that moment, as their ideal partnership on the dance floor blossomed into tender love, no one could have foreseen the events that would follow. Dr. Joseph Saunier's biography before meeting Michelle is filled with both joys and tragedies. Born in 1955 into a well-regarded medical family in Shreveport, Louisiana, he aspired from childhood to continue his family's legacy and become a doctor. With remarkable abilities, young Joseph earned a Bachelor of Science in Medical Science from Louisiana State University, LSU, in Baton Rouge in 1976. He then pursued further studies at LSU in Shreveport while commencing work at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Balancing university studies with work commitments skillfully, Joseph aimed to achieve exceptional professionalism in his chosen field. Constantly taking on additional workloads at university and honing his practical knowledge at the hospital, he caught the attention of the management for his dedication and proficiency. In his final year of training, Joseph was appointed chief resident. Upon completing his studies, Dr. Saunier chose to specialize in pathologic anatomy and later became an esteemed pathologist and laboratory director in Lubbock, Texas. Tragically marked by personal loss, Dr. Saunier endured the end of a 27-year marriage, a union he had believed to be happy, when his wife fell in love with another man. Demonstrating strong character and nobility, Joseph accepted her choice and agreed to divorce her. Even though this phase was challenging for him, both personally and professionally, Dr. Saunier maintained his reputation for integrity and responsibility throughout his career and life endeavors. After the divorce, he kept a very warm relationship with Becky and continued to support his 2 sons. He showed resilience and strength of character. When Becky died 2 years later at the hands of her new husband Joseph, he was shocked by the heinous death of his former spouse. Once again, he experienced a wave of grief and loss, repeatedly recalling the family years gone by and mourning the loss. However, the doctor remained a pillar for the family. He took over all the organizational issues and funeral expenses immediately, helping his sons survive the trauma. The children later admitted that it was his support that helped each of them overcome the pain. The tragedy left a deep mark on Joseph's heart. For a while, he fully devoted himself to work and raising his 2 sons. Later, the grief he experienced led to a reassessment of life. The man decided to start a new personal chapter in a new city and with a new woman. In 2007, Dr. Sonier moved with his sons from Dallas to Lubbock, Texas, where he accepted a position as chief pathologist at Covenant Health System. Feeling the need for something fresh to fill the void inside him, Joseph enrolled in a local dance studio. He enjoyed those classes also because it was where he met different women. A couple of times, he even tried, unsuccessfully, to build relationships with his dance partners. Then one warm summer evening, Michelle Tina appeared at the dance class. An elegant, graceful woman with a sense of humor and lively eyes attracted Dr. Sonier's attention instantly. Her smile lit up the room and Joseph realized she was exactly who he had been looking for. Michelle also noticed this confident and respectful man moving deftly on the dance floor. She was 47 and Joseph was 57 when they paired up perfectly in dance. With each passing session, they realized they were growing closer. Dr. Sonier suggested dating, and Michelle agreed. Thus began what seemed then like a happy new chapter in both their lives. Michelle had an attractive, innate charm that had such a strong influence on men that they were willing to change their lives for her, even destroy marriages or commit criminal acts for her satisfaction. Rochelle was one of those women possessing a distinct magnetism that naturally draws attention and ignites passion. In reality, both were embarking on new lives with fresh starts after personal romantic upheavals. Departing from Amarillo, Dr. Sonier's new partner was fleeing the fear and anxiety linked with Mike Dixon, owner of a private clinic specializing in plastic surgery and cosmetology. The woman met Mike in 2008 when she visited his clinic for Botox injections. Initially, their interactions were strictly friendly. However, what began as light flirtation soon evolved into a romance. Rochelle was a free, accomplished woman who had built a successful career as an executive in the NFL and did not need anything. Her 4 children were grown, and she owed no one anything. In contrast, Mike was bound by marriage commitments. The plastic surgeon began leading a double life, which came to light a few months later when his wife discovered the affair and filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Mike was so captivated by Rochelle that he almost didn't realize how significant a stage of his life was ending. He decisively separated from his wife for Rochelle. Interestingly, Rochelle never intended to marry Mike. She sought only joy and ease from the relationship. The affair required Rochelle to be equally obsessed with her partner, which did not align with her expectations. Unable to get the attention he desired, Mike attempted to pressure Rochelle, a tactic that only drove her away. Recognizing his manipulative tactics and desire to control her life entirely, the young woman decided to part ways with the plastic surgeon. By 2010, their paths had diverged significantly. Nonetheless, even after their breakup, Mike persistently pursued Rochelle, urging her to return. This behavior compelled Rochelle to move away, to vanish from his sight, and free herself from his oppressive influence. This is how Rochelle found herself in Lek. Dr. Sonier and Rochelle quickly bonded. Their relationship gradually blossomed into genuine love. Dr. Sonier's relatives warmly accepted Rochelle and celebrated the partnership's positive impact on Joseph's life. He spared no expense for her, showering her with gifts, inviting her to elite restaurants and private clubs within the city, and even taking her on trips together. After Joseph realized he had finally found a woman he was ready to spend his life with, he took her to Los. In the presence of his entire family, he proposed. At that moment, Rochelle was 47 years old and was absolutely enamored with her new partner. Her social media pages were almost daily filled with love declarations to Joseph. Naturally, Mike Dixon couldn't help but notice these posts. The former lover was emotionally devastated to learn that Rochelle not only had a new man, but also openly confessed her love for him and intended to marry him. He understood that winning back his old flame would be impossible. Despite this realization, he attempted to propose a renewed arrangement where they would at least become lovers again. However, Rochelle firmly rejected the notion and informed Joseph about the incident. Soon after, the couple began to feel as though they were being watched. At one point, they even noticed something resembling a camera flash through their backyard window, but didn't give it much thought, not fully grasping the potential seriousness of the situation. Things took a dire turn on July 11, 2012. A landscaper arrived at Joseph's home to discuss an upcoming project and discovered an open door when trying to contact him. Assuming Joseph might not hear him, he entered the house and found it in disarray. Most concerning was a bullet hole near the front door, suggesting an intruder may have been involved. The landscaper cautiously ventured further into the home in search of Joseph, and then checked the garage. There he found Joseph's son lying lifeless in a pool of blood with no signs of life. His body showed evidence of both stabbing and gunshot wounds. Concluding that the perpetrator might still be nearby, the landscape designer immediately exited the house and called for help. At 2:48 p.m. that day, police received a call and dispatched several patrol cars to the scene immediately. Arriving officers identified the victim as Joseph Saunier, a 57-year-old pathologist. Medical personnel on site confirmed his death. The incident profoundly shocked the public, as it occurred in one of the city's most peaceful, safe, and upscale neighborhoods with virtually no crime history. Dr. Saunier, a well-regarded member of his profession, was known for his calm demeanor and kindness, and had no known enemies who might wish him harm. Despite a broken window, it was clear this was not a robbery. Nothing was missing from the house. A bottle with its bottom shot off was found at the scene, likely used as an improvised silencer for a firearm. Shortly after discovering the scene, a forensic team arrived to collect evidence. The agent in charge appeared inexperienced, leaving several traces behind. DNA from the silencer and blood samples were sent to a lab for further testing. Neighbors told detectives they neither saw nor heard anything suspicious, and there were no CCTV cameras nearby. The investigation revealed that the perpetrator entered through a panoramic window overlooking the backyard, making his attack unpredictable. Inside the dining room, he confronted Dr. Saunier and began shooting. The wine bottle was probably used as a silencer during this time. Blood traces in the hallway suggested that Dr. Saunier was still alive after being shot. He moved to the garage where his attacker caught him and inflicted several stab wounds. An autopsy discovered 5 gunshot wounds and 11 stab wounds, indicating premeditated intent rather than a random act of violence. What remained unclear was who committed this heinous crime and their motive. The investigation focused on Dr. Saunier's close social circle. His fiancée recounted strange events in their lives in recent months before the tragedy. She believed Dr. Saunier had been stalked and mentioned seeing an unfamiliar person watching their home and windows. Michelle also described receiving persistent calls and texts before Dr. Saunier's death. Officers verified this information, but suspected these communications might have come from other women with whom Dr. Saunier appeared to have parallel relationships, since witnesses claimed he was in contact with several women simultaneously. Investigators inquired with Michelle to see if she was aware of the other women involved. She claimed she was unaware. Joseph's sons firmly refuted the notion that their father could have had mistresses, asserting that infidelity was contrary to his character. Nonetheless, investigators continued exploring a theory that jealousy might have motivated the crime. During the next interrogation, Rachel broke under pressure, cried, and admitted knowing several women who might be linked to the incident. She mentioned that numerous former girlfriends continued to stalk Joseph. He ignored these women, but they consistently displayed displeasure regarding his upcoming wedding. One such woman from Florida persistently called even after Dr. Saunier disclosed his serious relationship with Rachel. Another individual, a nurse and colleague of the pathologist, regularly reached out to him as well. A third woman, who had a daughter, sent a letter accusing Joseph of abandoning them shortly before his murder. In this same interview, Michelle mentioned Mike Dixon for the first time. Until now, she hadn't connected her and Joseph's surveillance to Mike. Since he had ceased all attention after her refusal to be his mistress, she assumed he had accepted her marriage and moved on with life. The police now had a potential suspect and sought to question Mike Dixon further. Mike willingly spoke with detectives and confessed that he had been deeply in love with Rachel, having even divorced his wife in pursuit of a future with her. The separation affected him greatly. He tried for a while to win Rachel back, but eventually accepted her decision. He then found someone new, a much younger medical student, who confirmed his alibi. He was at work during the crime and spent time with her afterward. Despite this lead, the investigation encountered several obstacles. All suspects, including Michelle herself, had solid alibis. Detectives attempted to identify possible enemies of the victim or individuals who might have had financial motives tied to his death, but faced challenges at every turn. No new figures emerged by the time the lab results were back. The situation seemed to hit a dead end. Unfortunately, the forensic results didn't add any clarity either. The DNA sample from the bottle didn't match the victim, and the police database couldn't identify whose DNA was found at the crime scene. Then, enforcement officials caught an unusual break. The police department received a call from Paul, an aspiring EMT from Amarillo. He shared that he was living with a buddy named Dave Shepard, who had recently confessed to committing a murder in Leck, and then attempted to take his own life but was saved. Paul provided detailed information given by a neighbor about the crime, including specifics known only to a select group of detectives, such as the use of a bottle muffler. Realizing that Shepard was indeed involved in the crime, officers pursued this lead. The caller claimed that Dave was just the perpetrator and that the mastermind behind the crime was an unknown doctor tied to plastic surgery. Immediately, officers started running a background check on this new suspect and discovered Shepard's violent criminal history. His record showed theft and hooliganism, but didn't include any major crimes. They identified him as divorced, unemployed, and involved in several theft incidents, one involving stealing $330,000 from a prominent businessman. Dave was brought in for questioning and soon started to confess. He confirmed that Mike Dixon had hired him for the crime. According to Dave, they met at a bar where both men were dealing with painful breakups with their partners. Under the influence of alcohol, their conversation took a turn into what became an established friendship. Mike Dixon shared his sad love story and complained about Rachel, who had left him and was now about to marry someone else. The man shared that he can't get over his former partner and is willing to do anything to get her back. Deciding that the only obstacle is Dr. Sunier, Mike and Dave devised a plan. However, their intentions, according to Dave, did not include murder. They merely wanted to slander the pathologist so that Rachel would leave him and return to Mike. First of all, they found women who were paid handsome sums of money, $1,000 each, to play the role of mistresses and pursue Dr. Sunier. Then came a letter from a woman with a child, claiming that Joseph had abandoned her. Dr. Sunier denied it each time, and Rachel believed him. It also turned out that the camera flash the couple had seen was the light from Dave's cell phone flashlight. He regularly drove to their house and pretended to conduct surveillance. Each such trip was financed by Mike Dixon, who handed out money for gas and related expenses. When spying and slander failed to separate the lovers, Mike set out to fix the problem in a more radical way. He confided in his friend that he wanted him to kill the pathologist. As payment, Dixon offered 3 silver bars totaling about $110,000. Dave agreed, with one of the bars given as a deposit. The hired killer immediately cashed it in at a pawn shop. According to Dave Shepard, when he arrived at Dr. Sunier's house, things got out of control. It was in shooting. "I got scared," Dave explained, and he started walking away down the hallway. "When I came to my senses from the shock, I shouted, 'Dr. Sunier, are you all right?' Hearing nothing back, I followed him into the garage where he was lying." Dave distinctly heard his last breath and bent down to check his pulse. There was no pulse. In his confession, Shepard claimed that he allegedly stabbed Joseph Sunier in an irrational and foolish attempt to cover up what he called involuntary manslaughter. "I stabbed him a couple times. I don't remember how many times. You say I stabbed 11 times? I had Dr. Sunir's phone in my hand and thought about dialing the emergency number for help, but didn't. Maybe that's why it happened 11 times. Mutilated the remains, then went to Mike's place where I got the rest of the bullion and tried to end my own life, said Dave, concerning agreeing to commit this crime. He did not fully grasp what he was agreeing to, and when he found himself in front of Joseph, he realized that he could not go through with the act. If not for an accidental gunshot, Dr. Sunir would still be alive today. The plastic surgeon was apprehended by police on the same day and charged with first-degree murder based on Dave's testimony and a comprehensive collection of other evidence, including compromising phone calls and text messages containing explicit confessions. During the first interview, detectives hoped to elicit a confession, but Mike Dixon resolutely denied everything, demanding legal representation. A lawsuit ensued. Dave Sheard, as part of a deal with the prosecutor, immediately pleaded guilty to his role as a hired criminal and waived the right to appeal his sentence. Consequently, instead of facing the death penalty, he received a life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon, against whom there was only circumstantial evidence, pleaded not guilty. In an unexpected turn during the trial, Dave, who was a key witness for the prosecution, testified that he committed the crime alone without Dixon's involvement. Under oath, he claimed that the silver bars were intended for investment in a business they had planned to start together. The jury could not reach a unanimous verdict, which led to a retrial being declared. In 2016, during the second trial, Dixon was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, an appeal filed by his lawyers resulted in the reversal of this judgment. Consequently, Dixon was released on bail set at $2 million. The fight for justice persisted as the prosecutor's office sought to have his sentence reinstated by the highest criminal court of the state. The prosecutor's motion filed on February 11, 2019, was granted in April 2020. Subsequently, Dixon's bail was revoked and an arrest warrant issued again. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed this lower court decision and reinstated Mike Dixon's sentence. It ruled that he must continue serving his life sentence without parole. Mike Dixon remains incarcerated in a prison in Texas. Dr. Joseph Sunir became entangled in this tragic series of events when he began dating Michelle in July 2011. She still regards him as the main love of her life and deeply regrets that she unknowingly led a criminal to such an honest and loving man. Megan Newton, born in 2001 to Michael and Sarah, also had a stepsister named Demi. However, Megan primarily spent her time alongside her mother Sarah, forging an incredibly tight-knit bond akin to best friends. Megan kept no secrets from her mother, while Sarah, in return, would often consult her daughter, who displayed wisdom beyond her years on various significant issues. The woman characterized her daughter as highly ambitious, dynamic, and affable. Megan's friends described her as someone with an excellent sense of humor, compassionate, and thoughtful. Her grandparents remarked that she possessed a golden heart from a young age, always prepared to lend a hand to others. In her elementary school days, Megan encountered a new classmate, a girl whose family had recently relocated to England from China. The girl faced significant challenges in understanding the curriculum and interacting with peers due to her lack of English proficiency. Consequently, the teacher placed her beside Newton, hoping the compassionate and helpful Megan would assist the newcomer. Megan embraced this role wholeheartedly, overcoming the language barrier to aid her classmate and adjusting to a new environment. By the time the girl moved back to China, she had achieved a respectable level of English proficiency. Megan's kindness and open-mindedness persisted into her teenage years and adulthood, finding expression in her passion for sports. Soccer, in particular, captured her heart, leading her to join the Stoke-on-Trent women's soccer team. Additionally, she engaged in coaching, dedicating her weekends to training young girls under 7 years old instead of resting, striving for her Level 1 coaching badge. Megan aspired to secure a sports scholarship in the USA. Her commitment to sports, especially soccer, was so profound that she chose to pursue a career in it, even getting a small tattoo of a soccer cleat to express her love for the game. Upon completing her schooling, Megan embarked on her college journey, aiming to pursue her passion further. Megan Newton, a promising student aspiring to become a sports therapist or physiotherapist, was the first in her family to attend a tertiary education institution. Despite her potential for a bright future, her dreams were tragically cut short in the spring of 2019. Megan led a busy life, balancing 3 part-time jobs. On April 19th, a seemingly ordinary day, she finished work at a local fish and chip shop and headed home around 10:20 p.m. Living independently in her own apartment, Megan enjoyed her newfound autonomy. After getting ready, she joined friends for a night out at a club in Hanley, where they danced and had drinks. By Saturday morning, a grim discovery was made in her apartment: Megan's lifeless body, naked and covered in blood, a victim of a brutal stabbing. This horrific event deeply affected the community, who remembered Megan as a vibrant and charming young woman. The apartment paperwork and IDs conclusively identified the deceased as Megan Newton, a young woman who was brutally murdered in her bedroom. Megan's family was promptly notified by the police upon their arrival, and they had to face the heartbreaking task of identifying their daughter at the morgue. Megan, whom they had cared for with great love and recently allowed to live independently, met a tragic end that they never could have imagined, even in their worst nightmares. The crime scene was immediately secured, and forensic experts were sent to Megan's apartment to collect any potential evidence. The autopsy revealed the horrifying extent of the attack on Megan. She was strangled first, losing consciousness due to the lack of oxygen, and then she received 9 stab wounds to her back that punctured both her lungs. Furthermore, it was clear that she had been sexually assaulted. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife that belonged to Megan, was found nearby. The forensic pathologist concluded that it was these stab wounds that led to Megan Newton's untimely death. The bloodied knife and apartment keys were sent to the lab in the hope that DNA analysis could identify the assailant. It was believed that the culprit had accidentally dropped the keys while leaving Megan's apartment after the murder. The investigation began with detectives reconstructing the events leading up the tragic incident by talking to Megan's friends and family. It was determined that Megan had spent the evening at a club before taking a taxi home in the early hours of the morning. The investigative team reviewed surveillance footage from the area around the nightclub and the route Megan took to get home. Effort to trace her final movements and possibly pinpoint the assailant drew their attention to footage showing Megan boarding a taxi accompanied by a friend and an unidentified young man, raising questions about this individual's identity and potential role in the crime. Subsequent video from within Megan's apartment complex showed the same young man again, this time within the premises. Luckily, a camera positioned in the common hallway offered a clear view of the entrance to Megan's apartment, allowing officers to monitor who came and went that night. The goal was to identify the murderer by scrutinizing the video recordings from the evening of the incident. At approximately 3:44 a.m., Megan was seen entering her apartment building's lobby with the same young man she had shared a taxi ride with around an hour before. They proceeded together towards her apartment, with Megan appearing cheerful and exhibiting no signs of apprehension or unease around the individual. Upon reaching her door, Megan used her keys to unlock it, and they both went inside. However, a particular moment caught the detective's attention. While Megan was unlocking the door, the young man stood behind her, scanning the area and even making eye contact with the camera lens at one point. This behavior immediately raised suspicions among the police. They pondered whether the young man had premeditated harming Megan, possibly after coercing her into sexual acts, and was checking for potential witnesses. Further scrutiny of the video footage from the remainder of the night revealed a disturbing fact. Only the young man exited the apartment the following morning around 5:54 a.m. He attempted to leave the building but realized he needed a special key fob to do so. He returned to Megan's apartment, momentarily retrieved the keys, and eventually managed to exit the building. The external surveillance captured him discarding an object where the blood-stained apartment keys would later be discovered by a neighbor. The most damning evidence of his involvement in Megan's death was obtained from another surveillance camera, which showed him walking away from the scene, inspecting one of his hands that appeared to be covered in blood. This critical piece of evidence marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. Identifying the young man as Joseph Trevor was swift due to a recent run-in with the law just the day before the tragic event. He had been arrested for possessing ketamine, a substance used both medically and in veterinary settings as an anesthetic and sometimes for pain management. The police officer who had apprehended Trevor immediately recognized him in the surveillance footage. Trevor, 18, hailed from a reputable family deeply rooted in the law enforcement community, with both his father and mother serving as police officers. He resided in a neighboring district and had a long-standing acquaintance with Megan Newton, as they had been high school classmates. Joseph led a seemingly typical life. He was academically successful and shared Megan's passion for sports, excelling in soccer to the extent of playing professionally for Newcastle Town and securing a sports scholarship in America with plans to relocate there after completing his studies. Like Megan, Joseph was pursuing higher education in Newcastle, poised for a promising future. To many who knew him, Trevor was perceived as a kind, affable, and sociable individual. Yet he harbored a less visible, volatile side to his character, capable of shifting from a jovial and engaging demeanor to one that was reclusive, brusque, and abrupt without any discernible trigger. This unpredictability left acquaintances unsure of which version of Joseph they would encounter on any given day. When the detectives in the Megan Newton case began to look more closely at Trevor's background, they came across some very unpleasant information about his past. Approximately 3 years earlier, at age 15, he was suspected of abusing another teenage girl because the attempt at intimate contact failed. He was not charged or punished. However, everyone around the school knew about the incident. After this incident, classmates at the school began to call Trevor a predator and child molester since the public arrest at the school could not go unnoticed. Now, for the police, this information became a warning because Megan was also subjected to forced sexual intercourse that night. Joseph Trevor was identified as the primary suspect in the assault case. Investigators focused on his movements that night. They already knew from surveillance footage that he was near the nightclub and got into the same taxi as Megan, later heading to her apartment with her. Detectives were unsure what Joseph Trevor did before arriving at Newton's home. They discovered that Joseph attended a party with school friends the previous evening. Coincidentally, they ended up in the same bar as Newton. Since they knew each other from school, they greeted each other and continued to enjoy their time separately. However, Joseph didn't stay long at the nightclub. Security noticed he had a packet of white powder and called the police. The squad that arrived detained Joseph and took him to the nearby police department. Despite his parents being in law enforcement, Joseph faced no legal repercussions. The officers unlocked his cuffs, seized the ketamine, and let him go, advising him to return home and avoid further drug use. Ignoring their advice, Joseph returned to the club where Megan was. He was denied entry, and around 2:40 a.m., he met Megan by the taxi queue. He shared his recent ordeal at the police station and his concern about facing his parents. Megan, always compassionate, let Joseph borrow her phone to contact a friend, but he couldn't find a place to stay. Seeing his distress, Megan invited Joseph to stay on her living room sofa. In the morning, once sober, he could decide how to approach his parents. Trevor gratefully agreed to Megan's offer, which explains why surveillance footage showed him entering a cab with Megan and her companion. He messaged his dad, falsely claiming he'd spend the night at a friend's place. The cab first dropped off Megan's companion before taking Megan and Trevor to her apartment on Fletcher Road. Surveillance recorded them entering the building and later captured Trevor discarding stained keys in the yard. Authorities believe that during those few hours, Trevor violently assaulted Megan, leading to her death. The evidence was clear, leaving Trevor with no way to dispute the accusations. Law enforcement was ready to apprehend him, and astonishingly, Trevor had already informed his parents about his role in Megan's death. After leaving the apartment just before dawn, Trevor went to a bridge over the A500 in Stoke-on-Trent. Sitting on the barrier with his legs hanging over, he seemed to be considering jumping. He perhaps sought an escape from the consequences of his deeds, contemplating suicide. Trevor had a history of depression and prior suicide attempts and had been seen on this bridge before. A bystander noticed Trevor and promptly alerted the authorities. They arrived quickly and transported him to the hospital for a psychiatric assessment. After evaluation, medical professionals deemed it safe for him to be discharged, and he returned home under the watchful eye of his father. Joseph revealed the whole truth to his mother. He could no longer carry the weight of his actions and was wary of the inevitable consequences of his deeds. After gathering his thoughts, he approached his mother and confessed his involvement in Megan Newton's death with the simple statement, "I did something bad." He also shared these confessions with a few of his friends, possibly driven by or other emotions, to admit to actions that couldn't be undone. Once Joseph's mother heard his admission, she quickly contacted the authorities to report his confession. However, by that time, the investigative team had already identified Joseph Trevor as their prime suspect through surveillance footage and were coordinating his arrest. The young man was taken to the police station for questioning, where he acknowledged being at Megan's residence that night, but couldn't provide details about the brutal attack. His account was consistent with surveillance footage showing their entry into her apartment. She had kindly offered him the couch for the night. Trevor claimed that their physical interaction was consensual and that after their intimacy, he blacked out. He had no memory of the subsequent events and couldn't clarify the specifics of the incident or his motivations. The only memory he retained from that night was Megan's apology. At 15, Trevor had also faced allegations of harassing a peer. He was ridiculed by his classmates, who labeled him with various derogatory terms. Some branded him a predator and charmer, and among them, Newton allegedly tagged him as Rolf Harris. According to Trevor's account, Ralph Harris, a famed Australian TV host, musician, and painter, was convicted of child abuse and other sexual offenses. These monikers deeply wounded Joseph throughout his youth. He endeavored to erase these bitter memories. Over time, Megan's apology for the schoolyard taunts abruptly revived these painful recollections, propelling him into a fit of anger. In that instant, he purportedly seized a knife. Nonetheless, the detectives dismissed his account, skeptical of his conveniently lapsing memory at a pivotal juncture. The law enforcement officers were persuaded that he was fully cognizant of his actions throughout. It's likely that Megan merely turned him away that evening. She offered him a place to stay out of friendship, recognizing his troublesome situation. Having known each other for years, attending the same school and now the same college, they shared numerous interests and aspirations for the future. Their mutual enthusiasm for soccer might have led her to believe it was safe to share her space with him overnight. Upon returning to the apartment, Joseph attempted to escalate their interaction to a more intimate level. Megan was not receptive and declined. This deeply frustrated Trevor, especially under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Disregarding her objections, he chose to use force in an effort to eliminate the risk of her reporting the incident. He decided to take drastic measures to ensure her silence permanently. Shortly after Megan Newton's tragic passing, Joseph Trevor faced charges for intentionally ending the life of his fellow student, along with committing 2 acts of sexual violence. The assault was discovered to have occurred in a manner involving multiple attacks. He was apprehended at his residence, and after several months the legal proceedings commenced, despite his initial partial admission. Joseph first refused to admit guilt, but later he changed his story. He acknowledged causing Megan's death, though he insisted the relations that night were consensual. He maintained this stance until the trial commenced on February 17, 2020. At the start of trial, he suddenly shifted his plea to guilty on all counts. This move seemed aimed at avoiding a lengthy trial, perhaps expecting that the jury would quickly dismiss his defense. As a result, Joseph received a life imprisonment sentence with eligibility for parole after a minimum of 21 years and 65 days. A dramatic moment unfolded in court when Trevor, during sentencing's conclusion, turned towards Sarah, Megan's mother, and silently mouthed, "Sorry." This action deeply infuriated her. Apologies at this juncture were meaningless and could neither amend the past nor alleviate the prolonged suffering Megan's family endured while awaiting trial. His belated apology appeared as an additional insult to the grieving mother. No apology could bring back Sarah's daughter or negate Joseph's heinous actions that night. The indifference Trevor displayed in surveillance footage post-incident, showing him nonchalantly leaving Megan's residence, underscored his lack of remorse. The irreversible harm inflicted on Megan and her family robbed them of future joys and milestones, leaving them burdened with lifelong sorrow. Megan's closest friend, Ricardo Eccles, shared that they had plans to shop in Manchester the day after her passing. He was heartbroken upon learning of his friend's sudden loss and spent days in shock. However, in honor of Megan, he gathered himself and initiated a fundraising effort to assist with Newton family's funeral costs. His efforts successfully raised several thousand British pounds, which were handed over to Megan's mother. Megan had always been a pillar of support for those in distress. Now it was time for her supporters to reciprocate by providing emotional support and assistance to her family and all who cherished her brief yet impactful life. A fervent supporter of Stoke City Football Club, Megan was remembered by the team's players and passionate supporters who dedicated a minute of applause during a game in her honor. Her family and friends also collected funds to set up a commemorative bench in her memory at a serene park in Stoke-on-Trent. This bench overlooks a scenic pond and playground suitable for football, a tribute fitting for someone so interconnected with her community and beloved by all who knew her.